The autumn sun beat down mercilessly on the auction platform where Eliza Hart stood with her 5-year-old brother Noah clutched against her side, waiting to be sold like cattle to the highest bidder. She had already lost everything, her father, her home, her freedom, but she refused to lose him. As rough voices shouted numbers that would decide their fate, one quiet cowboy stepped forward and made a bid that would change everything. But was he their salvation or just another kind of prison? Stay with me until the very end of this story, and don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now, let me take you back to that dusty Wyoming town in 1882, where two orphans stood on the edge of despair, and one man's decision would rewrite all their futures. The platform creaked beneath Eliza's boots, each groan of the weathered wood echoing through the town square like a death knell. She stood rigid, her spine straight despite the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders, one hand gripping Noah's small fingers with a determination that made her knuckles white. The boy pressed against her leg, his face buried in the worn fabric of her skirt, and she could feel him trembling despite the oppressive heat that shimmered off the dirt street. Around them, the crowd swelled and shifted, a sea of sun-darkened faces, calculating eyes, and mouths twisted into expressions ranging from pity to predatory interest. The auctioneer, a barrel-chested man named Sutton with tobacco-stained teeth and a voice like gravel, stood to her left, already warming up the crowd with his practiced patter. "Now, folks, I know times are hard," Sutton called out, his voice carrying across the square with the ease of long practice. "But opportunity don't knock twice. And what we have here is a genuine bargain for any man looking to expand his household with quality workers." Quality workers. The words made Eliza's stomach turn, but she kept her face carefully blank. She had learned in the 3 weeks since her father's death that showing emotion was dangerous. Tears invited contempt. Anger brought punishment. The only safety lay in stillness, in making herself as unremarkable as possible while the world decided what to do with her. But standing on this platform, there was no hiding. "The girl here is 14, strong as they come despite her size," Sutton continued, gesturing toward Eliza with a casual wave that made her feel like livestock. "Can cook, clean, sew, and she's literate. Her daddy saw to that before the consumption took him. And the boy, well, he's young yet, but healthy. 5 years old, good for light work now and heavy labor in a few years." Noah whimpered softly, and Eliza squeezed his hand in a rhythm they'd developed over the past weeks. 3 short pulses that meant, "I'm here. You're safe. We're together." It was a lie, of course. They weren't safe. They might not stay together, but it was the only comfort she could offer. The crowd murmured, a low rumble of interest mixed with skepticism. Eliza scanned the faces before her, trying to read their intentions, trying to determine which of these strangers might show them even a shred of mercy. She saw ranch hands in dusty work clothes, their faces weathered by sun and wind. Shopkeepers in cleaner attire, their expressions shrewd as they calculated profit margins. A few women scattered throughout, though their presence offered no comfort. Eliza had learned that women could be just as cruel as men when it came to protecting their own interests. And then there were the ones who made her skin crawl. The men who looked at her with something dark flickering behind their eyes, who studied her developing frame with an attention that made her want to disappear into the platform beneath her feet. She was 14, caught in that terrible twilight between childhood and womanhood, and she understood with a clarity beyond her years exactly how vulnerable that made her. "We'll start the bidding at $50 for the pair," Sutton announced, and Eliza felt Noah flinch against her leg. "Come now, gentlemen, that's a steal for 2 able bodies. Who'll give me 50? A hand shot up near the front, a thick-fingered merchant Eliza recognized from the general store. $50, he called out, his voice flat and businesslike. 50 for Mr. Hendricks. Who'll give me 60? 60. This from a rancher toward the back, a man whose name Eliza didn't know, but whose reputation she'd heard whispered among the other displaced children waiting to be sold. He was known for working his hands hard and paying them little. The bidding continued, voices calling out numbers with the casual efficiency of men purchasing seed or livestock. 70, 80, 90. Each increase felt like a nail being driven into a coffin, sealing their fate with the finality of cold iron. Eliza's mind raced through scenarios, each more desperate than the last. If they were separated, how would she find Noah again? If they were bought by someone cruel, how long could she protect him? Her father had always told her she was strong, that she had her mother's spine and his stubbornness, but standing here in the blazing sun with her brother's hand in hers and their future being decided by strangers' wallets, she felt anything but strong. $100! The voice came from the left side of the crowd, deep and rough, with what sounded like barely controlled anger. Heads turned, and Eliza followed their gaze to see a tall man in a dark coat pushing his way toward the front. She recognized him. Jonas Macklin, who owned a large spread 20 miles outside of town. His reputation was darker than most, shadowed by whispers about the women who worked in his household and never seemed to stay long. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Not him. Anyone but him. 100 from Mr. Macklin. Sutton's voice carried a note of satisfaction. A bid that high this early meant serious interest, which meant the final price would climb even higher. That's more like it, gentlemen. Do I hear 120? Silence fell across the square. $100 was already a substantial sum, more than many of these men could spare. Eliza watched Macklin's face, saw the satisfied smirk beginning to form at the corners of his mouth, and felt something cold and terrible settle in her chest. She looked down at Noah, at his small face still pressed against her skirt, and made a decision. If Macklin won the bid, if they were forced to go with him, she would find a way to escape. She didn't know how, didn't know where they would go or how they would survive, but she would not let her brother grow up in whatever darkness waited at the Macklin ranch. Going once, Sutton called, his gavel raised. Eliza's mind cataloged possibilities with desperate speed. The stable behind the general store where they could hide until nightfall. The wagon tracks leading north toward the mining camps where 2 more children might disappear among the crowds. The creek bed they could follow west, traveling at night, foraging what they could. Going twice? $150? The voice cut through the square like a blade, quiet, firm, utterly without hesitation. Every head turned toward the back of the crowd, and Eliza found herself standing on her toes, trying to see past the wall of bodies to identify the speaker. The crowd parted slowly, reluctantly, and a man walked through the gap they created. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing work clothes that had seen better days but were clean and well-maintained. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with the permanent squint of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, and his dark hair was shot through with early traces of silver, despite appearing to be no older than 30. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, but there was something else in his bearing, a kind of quiet watchfulness that suggested he missed very little. Most striking were his eyes. Even from the platform, Eliza could see they were a startling blue-gray, the color of storm clouds gathering on the horizon, and they were fixed directly on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Mr. Rowan, Sutton said, and there was something careful in his tone, a note of respect mixed with wariness. That's a generous offer. You're certain? The man, Rowan, didn't take his eyes off Eliza. I'm certain. Macklin's face had gone red, his jaw clenched with barely suppressed rage. 160, he spat out. 200. Rowan's voice remained level, almost casual, as if he were discussing the weather rather than bidding a small fortune for 2 children he didn't know. The crowd erupted in whispers. $200 was an extraordinary sum, more than many families saw in a year. It was also, Eliza realized with a sinking feeling, more than Jonas Macklin would be willing to pay, no matter how much his pride might be stung by the competition. She watched Macklin's face work through several expressions: anger, calculation, wounded pride, before settling into a hard mask. He turned and shoved his way back through the crowd without another word, his departure marked by the hasty steps of people moving out of his path. Any other bids? Sutton asked, his voice bright with the satisfaction of a much higher price than he'd expected. Going once, going twice, he brought the gavel down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off every building in the square. Sold to Caleb Rowan for $200. The crowd began to disperse, already moving on to the next item of business, the next piece of someone's life being parceled out and reassigned. But Eliza couldn't move. She stood frozen on the platform, Noah's hand still clutched in hers, watching as Caleb Rowan approached. He moved through the thinning crowd with unhurried steps, pulling a worn leather wallet from his coat pocket as he climbed the platform stairs. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the careful way he counted out bills and handed them to Sutton without ceremony. "Papers?" Rowan asked quietly. Sutton produced 2 sheets of paper from his coat, the contracts that would bind Eliza and Noah to their new owner for the next several years. Standard indenture agreements, the same legal documents that had been used to sell countless others in this hard country where the law turned a blind eye to such transactions. Rowan took them, folded them once, and slipped them into his pocket. Then finally, he turned his full attention to Eliza. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with as much dignity as she could muster. She wouldn't cower, she wouldn't beg. Whatever he intended, whatever had motivated him to spend such a sum, she would face it standing tall. "My name is Caleb Rowan," he said, his voice low enough that only she and Noah could hear. "I have a ranch about 15 miles west of here. It's not much, a few hundred acres, some cattle, horses. I run it myself with 2 hired hands who live in the bunkhouse." Eliza waited, her heart pounding. Men didn't usually explain themselves to their purchases. "I'm going to take you both there now," Rowan continued. "We'll travel until dark, camp for the night, and reach the ranch by tomorrow afternoon. You'll each have your own room in the main house. You'll eat 3 meals a day. You'll work. There's always work on a ranch, but you'll be paid wages, same as any hand. And you'll be safe." The words hung in the air between them, too good to be true, too simple to believe. Eliza searched his face for signs of deception, for the crack in the facade that would reveal his true intentions, but found only a steady, patient regard. "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it, rough with suspicion and exhaustion. Something flickered in Rowan's eyes. Not anger at being questioned, but something that looked almost like understanding. "Because I remember what it's like to have nowhere to go," he said simply, "and because no child should be sold like property." He turned to Noah, who was peeking out from behind Eliza's skirt with wide, frightened eyes, and carefully lowered himself into a crouch so he was at the boy's eye level. "What's your name, son?" Noah looked up at Eliza, seeking permission, and she gave a tiny nod. "Noah," he whispered. "Noah. That's a good name. Strong." Rowan's voice gentled even further. "Are you hungry, Noah?" The boy nodded slowly. "Well, I've got some supplies in my wagon, including some jerky and hardtack. Not fancy, but it'll keep your belly full until we can get a proper meal. Would you like some?" Another nod, slightly more enthusiastic. Rowan straightened and looked back at Eliza. "I'm not going to hurt you, either of you. I know you have no reason to believe me right now, and I'm not asking you to. But I'm asking you to come with me, because the alternative is standing on this platform until Sutton finds another buyer, and I think we both know that buyer won't be someone you'd choose." It wasn't a choice, not really, but the fact that he'd framed it as one, the fact that he'd spoken directly to her, rather than just claiming his property and moving on, created the smallest crack in the wall of fear she'd built around herself. "What about our things?" she asked, because she needed to say something, needed to assert some small measure of agency in this situation. "Do you have belongings somewhere?" "At the boarding house, Mrs. Fletcher's. Just a bag each. We'll collect them on the way to the wagon." He gestured toward the platform stairs. "Shall we?" Eliza took a breath, squeezed Noah's hand in their rhythm. "I'm here. You're safe. We're together," and began to descend the stairs. Rowan fell into step beside them, but didn't try to take Noah's other hand or guide Eliza with a touch on her elbow. He simply walked alongside them, a steady presence that felt neither threatening nor proprietary. The walk to Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house took only a few minutes, but Eliza was acutely aware of the eyes following them, curious townspeople wondering what Caleb Rowan wanted with 2 children, envious glances from others who'd been hoping to secure cheap labor, and at least one hard stare from Jonas Macklin, who stood in the shadow of the saloon watching their progress with naked hatred. Mrs. Fletcher had their meager belongings already packed and waiting by the door, a carpet bag for Eliza containing 2 dresses, a nightgown, her mother's hairbrush, and her father's pocket watch. and a smaller sack for Noah with his spare clothes and the wooden horse their father had carved him. The landlady's expression was carefully neutral as she handed over the bags, but her eyes lingered on Rowan with something that might have been approval. "You'll treat them right, Caleb," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded once, decisively, then looked at Eliza. "You're a good girl. You take care of that brother of yours." "Yes, ma'am." Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. They returned to the main street where Rowan's wagon waited, a sturdy farm wagon with a canvas cover stretched over wooden ribs, the bed loaded with supplies. 2 horses stood patiently in their traces, their coats shining with good care. Rowan loaded their bags into the back, then turned to Noah. "Would you like to ride up front with me, or would you feel safer in the back with your sister?" Noah looked between Rowan and Eliza, uncertainty written across his small face. Eliza could see him trying to be brave, trying to make the grown-up choice, and her heart ached. "It's all right," she said softly. "Whatever you want." Can Eliza sit up front too?" Rowan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. There's room for all 3 of us on the bench." He helped them both up with careful, impersonal efficiency. A hand under Eliza's elbow, a boost for Noah that had the boy giggling nervously despite everything. Then he swung himself up into the driver's seat, gathered the reins, and clicked his tongue to set the horses moving. The wagon rolled out of town, heading west, and Eliza watched the buildings grow smaller behind them with a mixture of relief and trepidation. She'd lived her entire life in or near this town. Her father was buried in the cemetery on the hill. Her mother's grave was there too, though Eliza had been too young when she died to remember much beyond a sense of warmth and safety that had never quite been replicated. Now she was leaving it all behind, riding into an unknown future with a stranger who'd paid $200 for the privilege of owning her labor for the next several years. Beside her, Noah was already fighting to keep his eyes open, exhausted by fear and the relentless sun. Rowan reached behind the bench and produced a canteen and a piece of jerky wrapped in cloth. "Here," he said, offering them to Noah. "Small bites of the meat. It's salty, and you'll want to wash it down with water." Noah took them with whispered thanks and immediately began to gnaw on the jerky with the intense focus of a hungry child. Rowan glanced at Eliza. "There's more if you want some." "I'm fine." "You're hungry?" It wasn't a question. "I can see it in your face. When did you eat last?" Eliza's jaw tightened. "Yesterday, breakfast." Rowan's hands flexed on the reins, but his voice remained calm. "There's bread and cheese in the box behind you, and apples. Eat something. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from hunger." The practical logic of it overrode her stubborn pride. Eliza reached behind and found the supplies he'd mentioned, wrapped carefully in cloth. She took a piece of bread and a wedge of cheese, breaking off small portions and chewing slowly, trying not to let her ravenous hunger show. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking steadily along the rutted road, the afternoon sun beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains. The landscape here was harsh but beautiful, rolling grassland broken by rocky outcrops, stands of pine in the distance, and everywhere the vast open sky that made a person feel both insignificant and somehow part of something larger. "Your father," Rowan said eventually, his eyes on the road ahead. "Sutton said consumption took him. How long ago?" 3 weeks. Eliza's voice was flat, carefully stripped of emotion. "He got sick in the spring. By summer he could barely leave his bed. He died on the 23rd of September. I'm sorry." "Are you?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with all the anger she'd been suppressing. "Everyone's sorry. They were sorry when he died. Sorry when the bank took our house to cover his debts. Sorry when the church said they couldn't take us in. Sorry when Sutton said we'd have to be sold to cover what was left owing. But sorry doesn't change anything, does it?" She expected anger at her outburst, or the cold disapproval she'd learned to recognize in the faces of adults who didn't like being questioned. Instead, Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "No," he said finally. "Sorry doesn't change anything. It's just words, and words are cheap. But I meant them anyway." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Beside her, Noah had finished his jerky and was leaning heavily against her side, his eyes drooping. She wrapped an arm around him, pulling him close. and felt him relax into sleep almost immediately. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, because the silence was becoming oppressive, and she needed to fill it with something, anything. "You said you have hired hands." "Two, Jack and Miguel. They've been with me for 4 years now. Good men, hard workers. They keep to themselves mostly, sleep in the bunkhouse, take their meals there, unless I specifically invite them to the house. They know I value my privacy, and they respect that." "And the house itself?" "2 stories. 4 bedrooms upstairs. I use one, the others have been empty since I bought the place. Main floor has a kitchen, sitting room, my office. There's a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and a root cellar. The land is decent for grazing, and I've got about 200 head of cattle plus the horses." It was more than Eliza had expected, more substantial than the single-room shack she'd been steeling herself to accept. "You run all that with just 3 men?" "It's manageable. Tight sometimes, especially during calving season or when we're moving the herd, but manageable." "And you want us to help?" "I want you to earn your keep, yes, but I'm not going to work you to death. You'll do what you can do, cooking, cleaning, helping with the chickens and the garden if you know how. Noah can do light chores appropriate for his age. In return, you'll have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and wages in your pocket." "How much?" Rowan glanced at her, and there was approval in his eyes at the directness of the question. $10 a month for you, 5 for Noah. That's fair pay for what I'll be asking you to do, and it's yours to keep or save as you see fit. Additionally, I'll credit $100 per year toward paying down your indenture contracts. At that rate, your contract will be satisfied in 2 years, and Noah's in 1. Eliza's mind raced, doing the mathematics. If what he was saying was true, and that was still a significant if, then she would actually have the opportunity to buy back her freedom, and Noah's, within a reasonable time frame. It was more than she dared to hope for. "Why?" she asked again. "You spent $200 on us. You're offering us wages and promising to credit our contracts. You're going to lose money on this arrangement." "Maybe." Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. "Or maybe I'm investing in having reliable help who'll actually stick around because they're being treated fairly. Maybe I'm tired of watching children get sold off to people who'll abuse them. Maybe I just couldn't stomach the idea of Jonas Macklin winning that bid. Does the reason matter?" "Yes," Eliza said simply, "because people don't usually do things without getting something out of it." Rowan was quiet for several minutes, his attention seemingly focused on guiding the horses around a particularly rough section of road. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and carried a weight of old pain. "I was 12 when my parents died," he said. "Cholera outbreak in the wagon train heading west. They left me and my little sister with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a wagon full of supplies we had to sell just to bury them. A man offered to take us in, said he needed help on his farm, that we could work to earn our passage. Seemed like salvation at the time." He paused, and Eliza could see his knuckles whitening on the reins. "He worked us like slaves, fed us scraps, beat us if we complained or didn't move fast enough. My sister, she was only 8. The work was too hard for her, but he didn't care. She got sick that first winter, and he wouldn't call a doctor, said it would be a waste of money on a useless mouth to feed. She died in February, and I couldn't even give her a proper burial." The pain in his voice was raw, unhealed, despite what must have been years since it happened. Eliza found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the shared understanding of loss. "I stayed 2 more years because I had nowhere else to go," Rowan continued. "Soon as I turned 14 and was big enough to pass for older, I ran. Worked odd jobs, saved every penny, learned everything I could about ranching and horses and the land. Took me 12 years, but I finally bought this place. Bought it free and clear so no one could ever take it from me. And I swore that if I ever had the means, I'd never let a child be sold into a situation like the one that killed my sister." He turned to look at her directly, and his eyes were fierce with conviction. "So yes, I have a reason. Call it guilt, call it redemption, call it whatever you want. But when I saw you standing on that platform, holding on to your brother like he was the only thing in the world that mattered, I saw myself in Sarah, and I couldn't walk away." Eliza felt something crack in her chest, the careful wall she'd built around her heart developing its first real fissure. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted so badly to believe that someone in this harsh world actually cared about more than their own profit. But trust was dangerous. Trust got you hurt. I don't need your pity, she said, the words coming out harder than she'd intended. Good. I'm not offering it. Rowan turned his attention back to the road. Pity is useless. What I'm offering is a fair deal and a safe place to live. What you do with that is up to you. They rode on as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Noah slept against Eliza's side, his breathing deep and even, and she found herself studying Caleb Rowan's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar near his temple, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed despite the clearly emotional weight of the conversation. He was an enigma, this man who'd paid a fortune for two strangers and now claimed he wanted nothing more than to help them. Everything Eliza had learned in her 14 years screamed that people didn't work this way, that there had to be a catch, a hidden cost that would reveal itself later. But she was also exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually exhausted from weeks of fear and uncertainty. And in this moment, riding toward an unknown future with the setting sun warm on her face and her brother safe beside her, she made a decision. She would take Rowan at his word. Not because she fully believed him, but because she had no other choice. She would work hard, save her wages, and protect Noah with everything she had. And if Caleb Rowan proved to be another Jonas Macklin hiding behind a kinder mask, she would be ready. She would always be ready. As the light began to fade, Rowan guided the wagon off the main road toward a stand of trees near a small creek. We'll camp here for the night, he announced, pulling the horses to a stop. There's good water, and the trees will give us some protection if the wind picks up. He helped Eliza and Noah down from the wagon, then began the efficient work of unhitching the horses and setting up camp. Eliza watched for a moment, then stepped forward. What can I do to help? Rowan looked up from securing the horses' hobbles, surprise flickering across his face. You don't have to. You said we'd earn our keep. I'd rather start now than sit idle. She kept her voice firm, practical. If she was going to be here, she might as well be useful. A slow smile crossed Rowan's face, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his features from stern to almost handsome. All right, there's kindling in the wagon bed left side. If you can get a fire started, I'll handle the rest. Eliza nodded and moved to collect the wood, Noah trailing behind her like a shadow. Together they built a small fire while Rowan finished with the horses and began pulling supplies from the wagon. A coffee pot, tin cups, a sack of beans, some dried meat, and a cast-iron skillet. Can you cook? He asked Eliza as he settled beside the fire. Yes. My mother taught me before she died, and I've been doing all the cooking since my father got sick. Then this is yours. He handed her the skillet and ingredients. Make what you know how to make. We're not fancy out here. It was a test, Eliza realized, though perhaps an unconscious one. He wanted to see what she could do, whether she'd been honest about her skills. She took the skillet and set to work, soaking the beans in water from the creek, seasoning the dried meat, and coaxing the fire to exactly the right temperature. As she cooked, Rowan set up bedrolls, one for himself on the far side of the fire, and two close together on the opposite side. The gesture wasn't lost on Eliza. He was giving them space, making it clear through action rather than words that he wouldn't intrude on their privacy. By the time the food was ready, full dark had fallen, and the stars were beginning to emerge in brilliant profusion across the clear sky. They ate in companionable silence, Noah wedged between Eliza and the fire, his eyes heavy, but his stomach finally full. That's good cooking, Rowan said when he'd finished his portion. Better than anything I've managed in 6 months. It's just beans and meat. Doesn't matter. It's good. He poured himself another cup of coffee and looked at Noah. You should sleep, son. Tomorrow's another long day of travel. Noah glanced up at Eliza, seeking permission even for something as simple as sleep. The dependency broke her heart even as it strengthened her resolve. He'd already lost so much, his father, his home, his innocence. She would make sure he lost nothing more. Go on, she said softly. I'll be right here. She helped him settle into the bedroll, tucking the blanket around him against the growing chill. Within minutes, he was asleep again, his small chest rising and falling with the peaceful rhythm of childhood. When Eliza returned to the fire, Rowan was staring into the flames, his expression distant and unreadable. She settled on the opposite side, maintaining the careful distance between them, and wrapped her arms around her knees. He depends on you a lot. Rowan observed quietly. I'm all he has. You're young to carry that weight. I'm old enough. Eliza's voice carried an edge of defensiveness. I've been taking care of him since our mother died when he was a baby. I can handle it. I don't doubt that. Rowan looked up from the fire, his eyes catching the light. But that doesn't mean you should have to do it alone. I don't have a choice. Maybe you do now. He let the words hang in the air between them, not pressing, just offering. I meant what I said before. You'll be safe at my ranch, both of you. And if you need help, you only have to ask. Eliza wanted to believe him, but belief required trust, and trust required vulnerability, and she'd learned that vulnerability was just another word for weakness. We'll see, she said finally, which was as close to acceptance as she could manage. Rowan nodded, seeming to understand the limits of what she could offer. He finished his coffee and stood, moving to bank the fire to a safer level for sleeping. Get some rest. I'll take first watch. Watch for what? Probably nothing, but we're carrying valuable supplies and there are people who'd think nothing of robbing a lone wagon. Better safe than sorry. It was a reminder of the reality they lived in, a harsh land where trust was scarce and danger was never far away. But somehow, knowing that Rowan was willing to stay awake to protect them while they slept made Eliza feel marginally safer. She moved to the bedroll beside Noah and lay down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The ground was hard beneath her, and the night air was cold enough to make her shiver despite the fire's warmth, but she'd slept in worse conditions over the past 3 weeks. Across the fire, Rowan settled with his back against a tree, his rifle laid across his knees, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their small circle of light. The sight was oddly comforting. As exhaustion pulled at her consciousness, Eliza found herself thinking about his story, about the sister he'd lost, the abuse he'd endured, the years of hard work that had brought him to ownership of his own land. If it was true, and she had no reason yet to doubt it, then perhaps his motivations really were as simple and complicated as he'd claimed. Perhaps some people really did try to be better than their circumstances required. It was a fragile hope to carry into sleep, but it was more than she'd had in weeks. Tomorrow they would reach the ranch, and she would see for herself whether Caleb Rowan's words matched his actions. Until then, she would rest, and she would keep Noah safe, and she would hold tight to the possibility, however slim, that their auction platform might have been not an ending, but a beginning. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was the soft crackle of the fire and the gentle rhythm of Rowan's breathing, steady and sure as the stars wheeling overhead. Dawn broke cold and clear across the Wyoming grasslands, the sky shifting from deep purple to pale gold as the sun crept above the eastern horizon. Eliza woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, her body stiff from sleeping on the hard ground, but her mind immediately alert. She sat up carefully, trying not to disturb Noah, and found Caleb Rowan crouched beside a rekindled fire, tending to breakfast with the practiced efficiency of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. He glanced over as she stirred, his expression neutral but not unfriendly. "Morning. Coffee's ready if you want some." "Thank you." Eliza extricated herself from the bedroll and moved to the fire, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but the warmth of it spreading through her chest was welcome against the morning chill. "How did you sleep?" Rowan asked, turning the bacon in the skillet. "Well enough." It was the truth, more or less. She'd woken several times during the night, her mind refusing to fully surrender to unconsciousness. But each time she'd found Rowan exactly where he'd been before, watchful, alert, keeping his promised vigil. Something about that consistency had allowed her to drift back to sleep more easily than she'd expected. Noah stirred in his bedroll, making small, whimpering sounds that Eliza recognized as the precursor to waking. She set down her coffee and went to him, kneeling beside the blankets. "Hey," she said softly, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Time to wake up, Noah. We've got traveling to do today." His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his features for a moment before memory returned. His gaze darted past her to where Rowan worked at the fire, and she felt his small body tense. "It's all right," she murmured. "Remember? Mr. Rowan is taking us to his ranch. We're safe." The word safe still felt dangerous to say aloud, as if speaking it might somehow jinx whatever fragile security they'd found. But Noah needed reassurance more than she needed to protect herself from potential disappointment. They ate breakfast quickly: bacon, hardtack softened in bacon grease, and more of the strong coffee for Eliza while Noah drank water from the canteen. Rowan worked around them with minimal conversation, breaking camp with the same methodical efficiency he'd shown the night before. Within an hour, the fire was doused, the supplies were repacked, and the horses were hitched back to the wagon. "We should reach the ranch by mid-afternoon if we keep a good pace," Rowan said as he helped them back onto the wagon bench. "The road gets rougher from here, but the horses know the way." The morning passed in a blur of rolling landscape and steady wagon motion. The road, really more of a track worn by repeated use than anything formally maintained, wound through increasingly rugged terrain. Pine forests rose on either side, broken by meadows where wildflowers still clung to the last days of their blooming season. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Noah, who'd been quiet and withdrawn for most of the previous day, began to show signs of cautious curiosity. He pointed out a deer bounding through the trees, his eyes wide with wonder. When an eagle soared overhead, he actually smiled, a small, tentative expression that made Eliza's heart ache with relief. "You like animals?" Rowan asked, noticing the boy's interest. Noah nodded shyly. "Well, there's plenty of them at the ranch. Cattle, of course, and horses. But we've also got chickens, a few barn cats to keep the mice down, and there's a dog. Old Brutus. He's getting on in years, but he's gentle as they come. You'll like him." "Can I pet him?" Noah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sure you can. Brutus loves attention. Just let him sniff your hand first so he knows you're friendly." It was such a simple exchange, but Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. Rowan was good with Noah, patient, kind, speaking to him as if his questions and interests mattered. So many adults treated children as inconveniences, especially children who'd been bought as labor. But Rowan seemed genuinely pleased by Noah's tentative engagement with the world around them. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature rose, and Rowan paused the wagon near a small creek to let the horses drink and rest. He produced more food from seemingly endless supplies: bread, cheese, apples that were starting to wrinkle, but still sweet. "Tell me about your life before," Rowan said as they ate, his tone casual but his attention focused. "What did your father do?" Eliza hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. But there seemed little point in hiding the past when it had led so directly to their present circumstances. "He was a carpenter. A good one. People came from 3 towns over when they needed fine work: cabinets, furniture, detailed trim. He taught me to read and write, made sure I knew numbers. Said education was the only thing no one could take away from you." The irony of that statement, given their current situation, wasn't lost on her, and she saw understanding flicker in Rowan's eyes. "Sounds like a smart man." "He was." Eliza's voice caught slightly. He got sick, and once he couldn't work, everything fell apart so fast. The medical bills, then the mortgage on the house, then the funeral expenses. By the time it was over, we owed more than we could ever pay." "And no other family to take you in?" "My mother's people are back east. We haven't heard from them in years. They didn't approve of her marrying a tradesman instead of staying in Philadelphia society. My father's parents died when I was small. There was no one." Rowan was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if chewing on difficult thoughts. "The system's wrong," he said finally. "Selling children to settle debts, it's barbaric. But the law allows it, so men like Sutton profit from it, and families like yours get destroyed by it." "You can't change the law," Eliza said flatly. "No, but I can choose not to participate in the cruelty of it." He looked at her directly. "I meant what I said yesterday. You and Noah aren't property to me. You're people who need help, and I'm in a position to provide it. That's all." Eliza wanted to ask more, wanted to push past the simple explanation to the complicated truth beneath it, but Noah was listening, and some conversations weren't meant for a 5-year-old's ears, so she simply nodded and finished her apple in silence. They reached the ranch in the early afternoon, just as Rowan had predicted. The property announced itself gradually, first split-rail fencing appearing alongside the road, then pastures where cattle grazed, and finally the main buildings coming into view around a bend. The house was larger than Eliza had expected, a solid two-story structure made of timber and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front and one side. The wood was weathered but well maintained, and flower boxes beneath the windows held the dried remnants of summer blooms. Behind the house stood a large barn, a smaller outbuilding that must be the bunkhouse, and various other structures whose purposes Eliza could only guess at. It looked like a real home, not just a collection of utilitarian buildings. Someone had cared about this place, had put thought into its arrangement and upkeep. "Home," Rowan said simply, and there was unmistakable pride in his voice. Two men emerged from the barn as the wagon approached, one tall and lanky with sun-bleached hair, the other shorter and more compact with dark features and the kind of permanent tan that spoke of indigenous or Mexican heritage. Both stopped their work to watch the wagon's arrival with undisguised curiosity. Rowan pulled the horses to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. "Jack, Miguel," he called out, "come meet the new members of our household." The two men exchanged glances, then approached with the cautious friendliness of people unsure what to expect. Up close, Eliza could see that Jack was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 20, with an open, honest face marked by sun and wind. Miguel looked to be in his 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a calm, centered presence. "This is Eliza Hart and her brother Noah," Rowan said, helping them down from the wagon. "They'll be living in the house, helping with domestic work and whatever else needs doing. Eliza, Noah, these are Jack Brennan and Miguel Santos. They run this ranch as much as I do." Jack's face broke into a wide grin. "Well, I'll be. It's about time this place had some proper cooking. No offense, boss, but your attempts at biscuits could be used as weapons." "None taken." Rowan's tone was dry, but there was warmth beneath it. "Miguel, you're quiet." Miguel had been studying Eliza with an intensity that might have been uncomfortable if not for the complete absence of anything predatory in his gaze. When he finally spoke, his English carried a slight accent but was perfectly clear. "I am thinking that Caleb Rowan does not do things without good reason, and I am wondering what the reason is." "The reason is, I was in town, saw children being sold, and decided to do something about it." Rowan's voice carried an edge of challenge. "You have a problem with that?" Miguel's expression didn't change. "I have a problem with nothing. I am simply observing that you have perhaps brought complications into a simple life." "Life's never been simple." "True." Miguel turned his attention to Noah, who was half hiding behind Eliza's skirts again. "Hello, pequeño. Do you know what that word means?" Noah shook his head. "It means little one in Spanish. Can you say it? Pequeño. Pequeño." "Close enough. You will learn." Miguel's stern face softened slightly. "There is a dog named Brutus who will be very happy to meet you. He is in the barn. Would you like to see him?" Noah looked up at Eliza, seeking permission. She hesitated, her protective instincts warring with the understanding that she couldn't keep him glued to her side forever. But Rowan spoke before she could. "Jack, why don't you take Noah to meet Brutus while Miguel and I unload the wagon? Give Eliza a chance to see the house without him underfoot." It was tactfully done, acknowledging her need to assess their new situation without making it seem like Noah was being separated from her against her will. Jack seemed to understand immediately, his expression gentle as he crouched down to Noah's level. "Come on, partner. Brutus has been lonely lately. He could use a friend." Noah glanced at Eliza one more time, received her nod of permission, and took Jack's offered hand with endearing trust. As they walked toward the barn, she heard Jack already chattering away about the various animals and their personalities, his easy manner clearly designed to put the boy at ease. "He's good with children," Rowan said quietly, following her gaze. "Lost his younger siblings in a fire a few years back. I think it helps him to have young ones around." Eliza filed that information away, another piece of the puzzle that was Caleb Rowan's household. "And Miguel?" "Ex-Army scout. He doesn't talk much about his past, and I don't push, but he's loyal, capable, and he has a code. He'll protect Noah as fiercely as he'd protect any member of this ranch." Miguel had already begun unloading supplies from the wagon with practiced efficiency, his movements economical and sure. He caught Eliza watching and gave a small nod of acknowledgement that somehow conveyed both respect and reservation. "Come on," Rowan said, picking up their bags. "Let me show you the house." The interior was as well maintained as the exterior, though clearly decorated by someone with more practical sense than aesthetic vision. The front door opened into a large sitting room with a stone fireplace dominating one wall, comfortable if worn furniture arranged around it, and windows that let in generous amounts of light. A doorway to the left led to what must be Rowan's office. She caught a glimpse of a desk piled with papers and ledgers. To the right, another doorway showed a dining table and the entrance to the kitchen beyond. "Kitchen's fairly well equipped," Rowan said, leading her through. "Previous owner's wife was particular about her cooking. There's a good stove, plenty of pots and pans, a pantry that's currently understocked, but we can fix that." The kitchen was indeed impressive, far better than the cramped corner where Eliza had prepared meals in their small house in town. A massive cast-iron stove stood against one wall, a deep sink with a pump beneath a window overlooking the back garden, and countless shelves and cupboards offering storage space she couldn't have imagined. "The pump draws from a well," Rowan continued. "Water's cold, but clean. For hot water, there's a reservoir built into the stove. The pantry's through here." He showed her a small room lined with shelves, currently holding basic staples: flour, sugar, salt, cornmeal, dried beans, and various preserved goods in jars. It was more food than she'd seen in one place in weeks, and her mind was already cataloging possibilities for meals. "Upstairs?" she asked. "4 bedrooms and a washroom. I'll show you." The stairs creaked slightly as they climbed, opening onto a hallway with doors on either side. Rowan pushed open the first door on the right. "This will be yours." The room was simple but clean: a bed with an iron frame, a dresser, a small table with a chair, and a window with faded curtains. The bed had sheets and blankets already on it, though they looked like they could use airing out. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that spoke of long disuse. "Noah's room is next door," Rowan said, moving to the adjacent room. It was slightly smaller but similarly furnished, with the addition of a small shelf that would be perfect for Noah's few belongings. "The washroom's at the end of the hall. There's a tub, though you'll have to heat water on the stove and carry it up. Not the most convenient system, but it works." Eliza moved to the window of her room, looking out over the ranch yard. From this vantage point, she could see Jack and Noah emerging from the barn, a large brown dog loping beside them. Noah was laughing, actually laughing, as the dog jumped up to lick his face. "The rooms are yours to arrange however you like," Rowan said from the doorway. "There are extra linens in the cupboard in the washroom. Take what you need." She turned to face him, struck again by the surreal nature of all this. A real bedroom with a door that closed, privacy, space. Things she'd been prepared to sacrifice completely were being offered without strings attached, or at least without any strings she could see yet. "Where's your room?" she asked, because she needed to know the layout, needed to understand the geography of potential danger. "Far end of the hall, opposite side. Farthest point from yours." His tone was matter-of-fact, but she could see he understood why she was asking. "You can put a chair under your door handle at night if it makes you feel safer. I won't be offended." The offer was so frank, so devoid of wounded pride or manipulation, that Eliza found herself reassessing him once again. Men who intended harm didn't usually offer their potential victims ways to defend themselves. "I need to get back to work," Rowan said. "Take the afternoon to settle in, clean up the rooms if you want. There's a trunk in the attic with fabric scraps and such if you want to make new curtains. Dinner's usually around 6, nothing fancy, just whatever can be put together. If you're up to cooking tonight, I'd appreciate it, but if you need more time to adjust, I can manage." "I can cook?" "Good. There's a chicken that needs using before it turns, and plenty of vegetables in the root cellar. Make whatever seems right." He paused at the doorway. "Eliza, you did well today. The traveling, the uncertainty, it's not easy. You're strong." He left before she could formulate a response, his boots loud on the stairs and then fading as he headed back outside. Eliza stood alone in the room that was supposedly hers, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She'd been sold. That was the stark reality. No matter how kindly Rowan phrased it, no matter what promises he made about wages and freedom, the fundamental truth was that she and Noah had been purchased like goods. The papers in Rowan's pocket gave him legal control over their lives for years to come. But he'd also given them rooms with doors, fed them without stinting, spoke to them with respect, let Noah play with a dog while promising protection and safety. The contradiction was exhausting to navigate. Eliza spent the next hour cleaning her room and Noah's, throwing open windows to air out the mustiness, beating dust from the mattresses, and making the beds with fresh linens from the washroom cupboard. The physical work was soothing, giving her hands something to do while her mind churned through possibilities and fears. She was arranging Noah's few belongings on his shelf when she heard boots on the stairs. Her body tensed automatically, but it was only Jack, Noah still chattering happily beside him. "Miss Eliza," Jack said with exaggerated formality, tipping an imaginary hat. "I'm returning your brother in one piece, as promised. He's made friends with Brutus, met all the horses, and learned 3 new Spanish words from Miguel. I'd say that's a productive afternoon." Noah ran to her immediately, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Eliza, there's a horse named Thunder, and he's all black, and Jack says maybe I can learn to ride, and Brutus is so nice, and he licked my face, and—" "Breathe," she said, unable to suppress a small smile at his enthusiasm. It was the most animated she'd seen him since before their father's death, and relief washed through her. Whatever else happened, Noah was happy in this moment. That had to count for something. "Jack?" Rowan's voice called from downstairs. "Need you in the barn." "Duty calls." Jack ruffled Noah's hair. "See you at dinner, partner." As his footsteps retreated, Noah looked up at Eliza with shining eyes. "This place is amazing. Can we stay?" The question pierced her heart. "For now," she said carefully. "We'll see how it goes." "But you like it here too, right?" Did she? Eliza looked around at the clean, simple rooms, thought about the kitchen downstairs with its well-stocked pantry and functional stove, remembered the way Rowan had looked at her when he promised she'd be safe. "I don't know yet," she answered honestly, "but it seems okay. So far." Noah seemed satisfied with that qualified approval. "Can I go back outside? Jack said I could watch them work if I stayed out of the way." "Stay where I can see you from the kitchen window, and if anyone tells you to do something, you do it immediately. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." He was already heading for the stairs, his earlier fear and withdrawal seeming like distant memories. Eliza followed more slowly, her mind turning to the evening meal. Cooking for 4 people, possibly 5 if Miguel and Jack ate with them, was well within her capabilities. It would feel good to do something productive, to earn her place here through demonstrable skill. The kitchen was hot from the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, but she built up the fire in the stove anyway, checking the water reservoir and setting a pot to heat. The root cellar proved to be a treasure trove: potatoes, carrots, onions, and even some early squash. The chicken Rowan had mentioned was indeed in the cold box, a good-sized bird that would make a fine roasted dinner. As she worked, peeling vegetables, seasoning the chicken, checking the fire temperature, Eliza felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. This was familiar territory. She knew how to do this, and she could do it well. Whatever uncertainties surrounded their situation, at least she could contribute something tangible. She was sliding the roasting pan into the oven when she heard the kitchen door open. Miguel entered, carrying an armful of firewood, which he stacked neatly beside the stove without speaking. Then he turned to face her, his dark eyes serious. "You're wondering if you can trust Caleb," he said. It wasn't a question. Eliza's hand stilled on the pot she'd been washing. Is it that obvious? To someone who knows what it is to be uncertain of one's place, yes. Miguel leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his attention focused. "I will tell you something. When Caleb found me 3 years ago, I was half dead from a bullet wound, lying in a ditch after being ambushed by men who did not like that a Mexican had been given an army commission. He could have left me there. Many would have. Instead, he took me to his house, called a doctor, sat with me for 3 days while fever tried to kill me." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "When I woke, I asked him why. He said the same thing he probably said to you, that he remembers what it is to have nowhere to go, that he will not turn away someone in need if he can help them. I thought he was a fool. I thought surely he would ask for repayment, demand servitude, or perhaps he wanted—" Miguel's expression darkened slightly. "Other things. But he asked for nothing except that I work honestly if I stayed. So I stayed. And in 3 years, he has never broken his word. Not once. Eliza absorbed this information, adding it to the growing picture of Caleb Rowan, a man apparently dedicated to rescuing strays, whether they be wounded scouts or orphaned children. It still didn't fully explain his motivations, but it suggested a pattern of behavior consistent with his stated intentions. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I see the way you watch doors and count exits. I see the way you position yourself always between Noah and the rest of the world. I understand these things because I did them too. I'm telling you that Caleb Rowan is one of the good ones. Rare, yes. Unexpected, yes. But real." Miguel straightened, moving toward the door. "Give him a chance, that is all." He left as quietly as he'd entered, leaving Eliza alone with her thoughts, and the smell of roasting chicken beginning to fill the kitchen. She returned to her work, but Miguel's words echoed in her mind. A pattern of rescue. A man shaped by his own loss into something unexpectedly generous. It would be easier, in some ways, if Rowan proved to be a villain. She knew how to steel herself against cruelty, how to endure and resist and survive. What she didn't know was how to accept genuine kindness without waiting for the cost to be revealed. Dinner preparations continued as the afternoon wore into evening. Eliza made biscuits from scratch, using the well-stocked pantry's flour and lard, and found dried herbs to season everything. She made gravy from the pan drippings and roasted the vegetables until they were caramelized and tender. It was the most elaborate meal she'd cooked in months, and she found herself taking pride in it despite the circumstances. As 6 o'clock approached, she heard boots on the porch, multiple sets, along with the jingle of spurs and low masculine voices. A moment of panic gripped her. This was it, the first real test of the dynamic Rowan had promised. The kitchen door opened, and Rowan entered first, followed by Jack and Miguel. All three had clearly washed up. Their faces were clean, their hair damp, their work clothes brushed free of the worst dust. "Something smells amazing," Jack said, his eyes widening as he took in the table Eliza had set with mismatched but clean plates and utensils. Rowan's gaze moved from the table to Eliza, and something that looked like genuine appreciation crossed his face. "You didn't have to go to this much trouble." "You asked me to cook dinner. I cooked dinner." She kept her voice neutral, professional. "It's ready now if you want to eat." "Noah!" Rowan called toward the sitting room. The boy appeared immediately, Brutus at his heels, his face flushed from an afternoon of outdoor play. "Yes, sir?" "Time to wash up for dinner. Pump's on the back porch." As Noah scurried to comply, the men settled around the table with the easy camaraderie of people who'd shared many meals together. Eliza served the food, placing the platter of carved chicken in the center, bowls of vegetables around it, and a basket of biscuits that were still steaming slightly. "Miss Eliza, you sit too," Jack said, looking confused when she remained standing. "There's plenty of room." She hesitated, uncertain of the protocol. In every other household where she'd heard of children being taken in for labor, they ate separately from the adults, often getting only leftovers after everyone else had finished. "Sit," Rowan said quietly, and it wasn't a command but an invitation. "You made the meal. You should enjoy it with us." Slowly, Eliza took the empty chair beside Noah, who'd returned from washing and was eyeing the food with barely contained excitement. She served him first, making sure his portions were reasonable for his small appetite, then took a modest amount for herself. The first bite of chicken was met with an audible groan from Jack. "Oh my word. Caleb, if you ever let her leave, I'm following her. This is incredible." "It's just roasted chicken," Eliza said, but she couldn't quite suppress the small flush of pleasure at the compliment. "It's heaven," Jack insisted. "The last time I had a proper meal was when we went into town for the church supper, and even that wasn't this good." Miguel ate more quietly, but she noticed he took seconds of everything and gave her a small nod of approval that felt somehow more meaningful than Jack's enthusiastic praise. Rowan ate steadily, his attention seemingly focused on his plate, but Eliza caught him watching Noah with an expression she couldn't quite read. The boy was chattering between bites, telling her about everything he'd seen that afternoon. The horses, the barn cats, the chickens that Miguel let him help feed. "And Caleb says tomorrow I can help collect eggs if I wake up early enough," Noah finished, looking at her hopefully. "Can I, please?" "We'll see," Eliza said automatically, then caught herself. They were supposed to be working, earning their keep. Letting Noah help with simple chores like egg collection made sense. "Yes, If Mr. Rowan says it's all right. Just Caleb is fine, Rowan said. No need for formality, and yes, Noah, you can help with the eggs. Jack usually handles the chickens in the morning, but I'm sure he'd appreciate the company. Happy to have a partner, Jack agreed. The chickens can be mean, especially that big red one. Having backup would be nice. Dinner continued with easy conversation flowing around her. Jack told a story about one of the horses getting loose last week and leading them on a chase halfway across the property. Miguel contributed a dry observation about Jack's tracking skills that had everyone laughing. Even Noah joined in, his earlier shyness melting away under the warmth of their acceptance. Eliza remained largely quiet, observing the dynamics of this household. There was genuine affection between the three men, a kind of brotherly regard that came from shared work and mutual respect. They teased each other, but never cruelly. They listened when someone spoke. They made space for Noah in their conversation without talking down to him. It was so different from what she'd expected, so far from the harsh, hierarchical environment she'd braced herself to endure, that she almost didn't know how to process it. After dinner, Jack and Miguel insisted on clearing the dishes despite her protests. You cooked, you don't clean, Jack said firmly. That's the rule in this house. Has been since Caleb first hired us, and it'll stay that way. Rowan caught her eye and gestured toward the sitting room. Got a minute? Her stomach tightened, but she followed him, leaving Noah helping Jack stack plates with more enthusiasm than skill. Rowan settled into one of the chairs by the cold fireplace and indicated she should take the other. First day, he said. How are you feeling about everything? It was such a straightforward question, devoid of manipulation or hidden agenda, that Eliza found herself answering honestly. Confused. I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't this. What did you expect? Harder work, worse treatment, separation from Noah, constant reminders that we're here because you own our labor. She met his eyes directly. Instead, you gave us private rooms, fed us at your table, and let my brother play all afternoon. It doesn't make sense. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. My sister Sarah, he said finally, worked herself to exhaustion for a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool. She was 8 years old and carrying water from a well in winter, her hands so cold they'd crack and bleed. She gathered eggs with fever burning through her. She cooked and cleaned until she collapsed. And when she died, that man, the one who owned our labor, didn't even mark her grave, just put her in the ground and went looking for another child to replace her. His voice was controlled, but Eliza could hear the rage beneath it, old fury that had never quite burned itself out. I swore I'd never be that man, Rowan continued. I swore if I ever had the means to help someone in the same situation, I'd do better. So yes, you have private rooms. Yes, you eat at the table with us. Yes, Noah gets to be a child for a few hours a day instead of being worked until he breaks. Because that's what decent human beings do, even if the law says I don't have to. Eliza felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but opening. How do I know you'll keep being that person? How do I know this isn't just... She struggled for words. The good behavior before the real situation reveals itself? You don't. Rowan's answer was blunt. You can't know. I can make all the promises in the world, but until time proves them true, they're just words. All I can tell you is that I've been living by these principles for 6 years since I bought this place. Miguel's been here for 3, Jack for 4. Ask them if I've changed. Ask them if I've ever gone back on my word. Miguel already told me, she admitted. And? And I'm trying to trust it, but trust is... She trailed off, unable to articulate the complex fear and hope tangled together in her chest. Hard, Rowan finished for her, especially when you've been let down before. I get it, so take your time. Watch and wait. Test me if you need to. But while you're deciding whether to trust me, at least try to live here. Really live, not just survive. Let Noah be happy. Learn the ranch. Make it a home if you can. Why does it matter to you if we're happy? The question burst out before she could stop it. You paid for labor. Why do you care about anything beyond that? Rowan smiled slightly, though there was sadness in it. Because happiness makes people work better? Because misery is exhausting to live around? Because I'm a human being with a conscience? He shook his head. Pick whatever reason makes sense to you, Eliza. But the truth is, I care because I do. There doesn't have to be a complicated explanation. It was perhaps the most honest answer anyone had ever given her, precisely because it refused to over-explain or justify itself. Rowan cared because he was the kind of person who cared. Some people were built that way, shaped by their experiences into something softer than the world usually allowed. I should get Noah ready for bed, she said, standing. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. One more thing. Rowan stood as well. Your wages start today. I'll pay you at the end of each week. Easier to keep track that way. And the credit toward your contract starts accumulating now, too. I'll show you the ledger tomorrow so you can verify the numbers yourself. Eliza nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The careful way he accounted for everything, making sure she could check his work, was another small piece of evidence that maybe, possibly, she could begin to lower her guard. She collected Noah from the kitchen where he was still helping Jack wash dishes by splashing more water on the floor than on the plates, and guided him upstairs. The evening routine of washing, changing into his nightshirt, and settling into bed was blessedly normal, an anchor point of familiarity in a day of overwhelming change. Eliza, Noah said as she tucked the blankets around him. I like it here. Is that okay? Yes, sweetheart. It's okay. Are we going to stay? Forever? I don't know about forever, she said carefully, but we'll stay for now. And I'll keep you safe. That's a promise. She kissed his forehead and turned down the lamp, leaving the door open a crack so she could hear if he called for her in the night. In her own room, she prepared for bed with mechanical efficiency, her mind replaying the day's events over and over. They'd been here less than 24 hours, and already her understanding of their situation had been challenged multiple times. Rowan wasn't the tyrant she'd feared. The ranch wasn't the prison she'd imagined. The work would be real. The situation was still complicated, but maybe, just maybe, it was survivable in ways she hadn't dared to hope. Eliza lay in bed, staring at the ceiling where moonlight painted silver patterns through the window, and made herself a promise. She would give this place 1 month, 30 days to see if Caleb Rowan's actions continued to match his words. 30 days to determine if the safety he promised was real or illusion. And if at the end of that time he'd proven himself true, then perhaps she could begin to believe in the impossible. That sometimes, rarely, people were exactly as good as they seemed. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was the possibility of trust, which was more than she'd had since the moment she'd climbed onto that auction platform. And for now, possibility was enough. The first month passed in a rhythm of work and watchfulness, each day adding another layer to Eliza's understanding of the ranch and the people who inhabited it. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, learned the temperament of the cantankerous stove, discovered which chickens were reliable layers and which were prone to hiding their eggs in unexpected places. Noah thrived under the attention of 3 men who seemed genuinely invested in his well-being, growing braver and more talkative with each passing day. And through it all, Eliza watched Caleb Rowan with the careful attention of someone still waiting for the mask to slip. But the mask never slipped, because there was no mask. The man who'd made promises on that first day proved to be exactly who he'd claimed, fair, consistent, and true to his word down to the smallest detail. He paid their wages every Friday evening, counting out the bills and coins with meticulous care and recording everything in a ledger he kept in his office. The credit toward their contracts accumulated precisely as he'd promised, and he showed her the numbers each week without her having to ask. It was disorienting, the steady reliability. Eliza had spent so long bracing for betrayal that she hardly knew what to do with trustworthiness. The morning everything changed started like any other. November had arrived with its promise of winter, bringing frost that silvered the grass and turned breath to visible clouds in the cold air. Eliza was in the kitchen making biscuits when she heard horses approaching at speed, not the steady clip of routine travel, but the urgent drumming of riders pushing their mounts hard. She moved to the window and felt her stomach drop. 3 men on horseback were coming up the road, and even at this distance she recognized the lead rider. Jonas Macklin sat his horse with the aggressive confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, his face set in hard lines that promised trouble. "Caleb!" She didn't realize she'd shouted until his name was already echoing through the house. Within seconds, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression shifting from concern to grim recognition as he followed her gaze. "Take Noah and go upstairs," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge she'd never heard before. "Lock yourselves in your room and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "What does he want?" "Nothing he's going to get. Go, now." The command in his voice left no room for argument. Eliza grabbed Noah, who'd been sitting at the table practicing his letters, and hustled him toward the stairs. Behind her, she heard Caleb opening the gun cabinet in his office, the metallic click of rifles being checked and loaded. From her bedroom window, Eliza watched the riders pull up in front of the house. Macklin dismounted with theatrical slowness, his two companions, rough-looking men she didn't recognize, flanking him like bodyguards. Miguel and Jack had emerged from the barn, moving to positions that suggested military training, their postures alert and ready. Caleb walked out onto the porch, and even from this distance, Eliza could see the change in him. The gentle rancher who'd patiently taught Noah to collect eggs had vanished, replaced by someone harder, more dangerous. He held a rifle with the casual competence of a man who knew exactly how to use it. "Macklin," his voice carried clearly in the cold morning air. "You're on my property uninvited. State your business or leave." Macklin's laugh was ugly. "Business? My business is reclaiming what should have been mine. You cheated me out of a fair purchase, Rowan, drove the price up out of spite, and then took what I'd already claimed. I outbid you in a legal auction. There was no cheating involved." "Legal?" Macklin spat the word like a curse. "You know damn well I'd already arranged with Sutton to take the girl. We had an understanding." Eliza's hands clenched on the windowsill. An understanding, meaning Macklin had tried to rig the auction before it even began, probably offering Sutton a cut to ensure no serious competition. The thought of what would have happened if Caleb hadn't intervened made her stomach turn. "Whatever arrangement you had with Sutton is between you and him," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. "The girl and her brother are under my protection now. They're not going anywhere." "Protection," Macklin's tone was mocking. "That what you're calling it? I know what you really want her for, Rowan. Same thing any man wants a pretty young thing like that for. At least I'm honest about my intentions." The words hung in the air like poison. Eliza saw Caleb's grip tighten on the rifle, saw Miguel take a step forward with murder in his eyes. But it was Jack who spoke, his usual easy drawl replaced by something cold and sharp. "You want to repeat that, Macklin? Because it sounds like you're accusing our boss of something that might require you to back up your words with action." "I'm saying Rowan's got no moral high ground here. He bought himself a girl, same as I tried to do. Difference is, I wouldn't pretend it was charity." Beside her, Noah whimpered. "Eliza, what does he mean? Why is that man saying bad things about Caleb?" "Hush!" She pulled him close, her eyes never leaving the scene below. "It's going to be all right." But she wasn't sure she believed it. The tension in the yard was building like a thunderstorm, and she could see Macklin's men shifting their weight, hands moving toward the guns at their hips. This could turn violent with terrifying speed. Caleb descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately, putting himself between Macklin and the house. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made even Macklin's companions look uneasy. "I'm going to explain something to you one time, Jonas, and you're going to listen carefully. Eliza and Noah Hart are members of my household. They work here, they're paid fair wages, and they're treated with respect. What you're suggesting, what you've implied, is an insult not just to me, but to them. And I don't tolerate insults to my people." "Your people," Macklin sneered. "You bought them, Rowan. They're property, no matter how you dress it up with pretty words." "They're under my protection," Caleb repeated, and now there was steel in every syllable. "That means anyone who threatens them threatens me. Anyone who tries to take them goes through me. And I promise you, Jonas, you don't want to try going through me." Miguel had moved to Caleb's left, Jack to his right, forming a wall of 3 armed men facing down the intruders. The message was clear and unmistakable. This wasn't just Caleb Rowan's fight. It was all of theirs. Macklin's face had gone red with rage. You think you can threaten me? You think 3 ranch hands are enough to stand against what I can bring down on this place? I've got friends, Rowan. Important friends. The sheriff owes me favors. The bank knows my family. You're nobody, just some drifter who got lucky and bought a piece of land. Cross me, and I'll make sure you lose everything. Then I'll lose everything standing up for what's right, rather than keeping everything by being a coward. Caleb raised the rifle slightly, not quite aiming it, but making clear it could be aimed in a heartbeat. Now, get off my property. Don't come back. And if I hear you've been spreading lies about Miss Eliza or causing trouble in town, we're going to have a very different kind of conversation. For a long moment, Macklin stared at him, clearly calculating whether to push this confrontation further. His hands flexed, and Eliza held her breath, certain she was about to witness violence. Then one of Macklin's men, the older of the two, spoke quietly. "Boss, this ain't worth it. 3 armed men and we're on their ground. We should go." Macklin's jaw worked furiously, but some instinct for self-preservation finally kicked in. He turned and mounted his horse with enough force to make the animal sidestep nervously. "This isn't over, Rowan," he snarled. "You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just a fool. And fools don't last long in this country." "Neither do bullies," Caleb replied evenly. "Safe travels, Jonas. Don't let the fence hit you on your way out." Macklin wheeled his horse and spurred it viciously, his companions following close behind. They thundered back down the road, leaving a cloud of dust and the echo of hoofbeats in their wake. The moment they were out of sight, Caleb's posture changed. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he lowered the rifle with what looked like relief. Miguel said something too quiet for Eliza to hear, and Caleb nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. Jack headed back toward the barn, but his movements were still tense, watchful. Caleb looked up at the house, and even from this distance, Eliza could see him scanning the windows. She stepped back instinctively, then realized the foolishness of hiding now. He knew she'd been watching. He'd probably expected it. A knock came at her door a few minutes later, soft, cautious. "Eliza, it's safe now. Can I come in?" She unlocked the door and opened it to find Caleb standing in the hallway, the rifle now absent but tension still evident in the set of his jaw. He looked past her to where Noah sat on the bed, wide-eyed and scared. "You both okay?" Caleb asked. "We're fine." Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "What did he really want?" Caleb hesitated, glancing at Noah, clearly weighing how much to say in front of the boy. "To make trouble. To try to intimidate me into giving you up. It didn't work. He said terrible things about you." "I know, I heard them." Caleb's expression was grim. "None of them were true, Eliza. I need you to know that. What I told you on the first day, what I've been showing you for the past month, that's who I am, not what Jonas Macklin's dirty mind conjured up." She believed him. That was the strange part. A month ago, she would have assumed the worst of any man's intentions. But she'd lived in this house, watched Caleb interact with her and Noah, seen the careful way he maintained boundaries and respected their privacy. His actions had earned him the benefit of the doubt, even against Macklin's poisonous insinuations. "I know," she said quietly. "I believe you." Something shifted in Caleb's eyes. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "Thank you. That means more than you know." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "I need to be honest with you about something." Macklin meant what he said about having influence. "He could make trouble for us. For you and Noah specifically. I need you to be careful when you're in town. Stay close to me or one of the hands. And if anyone asks about your situation here, you tell them the truth, that you're paid workers, treated fairly, and here by choice." "By choice?" Eliza couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Caleb, we were sold. The papers you have are going in the stove tonight." He said it so matter-of-factly that for a moment she didn't comprehend. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and Macklin's visit made up my mind. Those contracts are legal chains, and I don't want to hold chains over anyone, so I'm burning them. After that, you and Noah are free to stay or go as you choose." Eliza stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. You're destroying the contracts?" "Yes. But you paid $200 for them." "Best $200 I ever spent, if it kept you away from men like Macklin." Caleb met her eyes directly. I told you from the beginning I wasn't buying you to own you. This just makes it official. You're free, Eliza, both of you. You always were in my eyes. Now it'll be true on paper, too. Or rather, it'll be true because there won't be any paper. The room seemed to tilt. Freedom. Real, legal freedom, not contingent on working off a debt or earning credits toward a contract, just freedom. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Because it's right. Because those papers give me power over you, and I don't want that power. I want you to stay because you choose to, not because some legal document says you have to. He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. I'm hoping you'll choose to stay. You and Noah both. But that has to be your decision. Noah had been listening with the intense focus children bring to adult conversations they only partially understand. Now he spoke up, his small voice uncertain. If we're free, does that mean we have to leave? No, pequeño, Caleb said gently. It means you get to decide. Stay or go. It's up to you and your sister. Noah looked at Eliza with such hope in his eyes that her heart ached. Can we stay, please? I like it here. I like Caleb and Jack and Miguel and Brutus and the chickens and... I know, sweetheart. She knelt beside him, taking his hands. I know you do. Do you like it here? Noah asked. Because if you don't, we can go. But I really, really want to stay. The question forced Eliza to confront something she'd been avoiding for weeks. Did she like it here? The work was hard but satisfying. The food was plentiful and good. The accommodations were better than anything she'd known. And the people, these rough, kind men who'd welcomed them without reservation, had become something approaching friends. More than that, she felt safe here, in a way she hadn't felt since her father's illness had first revealed how fragile their security had always been. Caleb protected them not because he owned them, but because he'd chosen to. That choice, freely made and consistently honored, meant more than any contract could have. Yes, she said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. I like it here. Then we can stay? Noah's face lit up with such joy that Eliza had to smile despite the weight of the decision. She looked up at Caleb, who stood in the doorway watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. If the offer's genuine, if you really mean it, we'll stay. Not because we have to, because we want to. The smile that crossed Caleb's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, warm, transforming everything it touched. The offer's genuine. It's always been genuine. He cleared his throat, clearly affected by emotion he was trying to control. Welcome home then, for real this time. After he left, Eliza sat on the edge of Noah's bed, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Freedom. Home. Words she'd thought lost to them forever, now offered back with no strings attached. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. Eliza went through her usual tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending, but her mind was elsewhere, turning over this new reality from every angle. That evening, after dinner, Caleb made good on his promise. He called everyone into the sitting room, Eliza, Noah, Miguel, and Jack, and produced the indenture contracts from his office. These, he said, holding up the papers, represented a legal obligation. They said that Eliza and Noah owed me labor for the next several years to pay off the money I spent buying their contracts. But I didn't buy them to own them. I bought them to set them free. So that's what I'm doing now. He walked to the fireplace, where a small fire had been laid against the evening chill, and held the papers over the flames. The edges caught first, curling and blackening. Then the fire spread hungrily across the text, across the clauses and terms and legal language that had defined Eliza and Noah's worth in cold commercial terms. Noah watched with wide eyes. Miguel nodded approvingly. Jack let out a quiet whoop of celebration, and Eliza felt tears burning in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. Within moments, the contracts were nothing but ash drifting up the chimney, gone as if they'd never existed. There, Caleb said, dusting his hands. It's done. You're free people with all the rights and dignity that entails. You work here because you choose to. You're paid fair wages for your labor. And if you ever decide to leave, all I ask is reasonable notice so I can find help to replace you. We're not leaving, Noah announced with the absolute certainty of childhood. Not planning to, Eliza agreed quietly, and was rewarded with another of those transformative smiles from Caleb. The celebration was subdued but genuine. Jack produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, pouring small measures for the adults and finding some preserved peaches for Noah. They sat around the sitting room talking and laughing with an ease that would have seemed impossible a month ago. As the evening wound down and Noah began to yawn, Miguel caught Eliza's attention. "You made the right choice," he said quietly. "Staying." "I hope so. I know so. This place," he gestured around them. "It is more than a ranch. It is what Caleb made it. A place where people can heal, where they can become who they were meant to be before the world broke them." His dark eyes were serious. "You and your brother, you are part of that now, part of making this place what it is." Later, after Noah was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Eliza found herself unable to rest. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and padded downstairs, thinking to make herself some tea. She found Caleb in the kitchen, apparently with the same idea, a kettle already heating on the stove. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much has happened today." She settled at the kitchen table, accepting the cup of tea he poured for her. "Macklin's visit, the contract's burning. It's a lot to take in." Caleb sat across from her, his hands wrapped around his own cup. "I meant what I said earlier about Macklin potentially making trouble. He's not the type to let a grudge go easily." "I know." Eliza had been thinking about that too, the shadow side of their newfound freedom. "What do you think he'll do?" "Hard to say. He might try to turn opinion against us in town, spread rumors about impropriety or mistreatment. He might try to use his influence with the sheriff to cause legal problems. Or he might just let it fester and wait for an opportunity to strike when we're vulnerable." The possibilities were unsettling, but Eliza found she wasn't as frightened as she would have been a month ago. "We'll deal with it. Whatever comes." "We will." Caleb's emphasis on the plural was deliberate. "You're not alone in this, Eliza. Whatever Macklin tries, he's going up against all of us." They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking their tea and listening to the house settle around them. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance a coyote answered with its distinctive yip. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said finally. "About your sister." Caleb's expression tightened, but he nodded. "What do you want to know?" "You said you couldn't give her a proper burial. Where is she?" "Kansas, little town called Redemption, though there was precious little redemption to be found there." His voice was rough with old pain. "The man who owned us buried her in a field behind his barn. No marker, no ceremony, just a hole in the ground." "Have you ever gone back?" "Once, about 5 years ago after I'd saved enough money and established the ranch. I wanted to do it right, give her what she deserved." He stared into his tea as if seeing the past reflected there. "I bought the prettiest headstone I could afford, had her name carved into it. Sarah Ann Rowan, beloved sister. I wrote out there thinking I'd finally make peace with it." "What happened?" "The property had changed hands twice. The new owner had plowed that field and planted wheat. I couldn't even find where she'd been buried." His hands tightened around the cup. "So I put the headstone in the town cemetery, in a plot I purchased. It marks an empty grave, but at least her name is there. At least someone remembers she existed." Eliza reached across the table and placed her hand over his without thinking. The gesture surprised them both, but she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry, that must have been incredibly hard." "It was, but it also taught me something important." He turned his hand to gently clasp hers. "The dead are gone, no matter how much we grieve them. The best we can do is honor their memory by being better, by making sure other people don't suffer the same way they did. That's why I couldn't walk away from you and Noah, because walking away would have meant Sarah's death taught me nothing." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Eliza couldn't quite name. She was intensely aware of the warmth of his hand holding hers, the way the lamplight caught in his eyes, the quiet strength that emanated from him. She pulled her hand back carefully, suddenly flustered. "I should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy." "Of course." If Caleb was disappointed by her withdrawal, he hid it well. "Sleep well, Eliza." She was halfway to the stairs when his voice stopped her. Eliza, for what it's worth, I'm glad you chose to stay, both of you. This place feels more like a home with you here. The words settled warm in her chest, and she carried them upstairs with her. A small light against the darkness of uncertainty that still lingered despite the burned contracts and promises of freedom. Over the next 2 weeks, the rhythm of ranch life continued, but with a subtle shift. Eliza noticed it in small ways: how Caleb sought her opinion on household decisions, how Jack and Miguel deferred to her judgment on matters related to the kitchen and domestic management, how Noah was included in planning for the upcoming winter preparations. They weren't just workers anymore. They were family. But Macklin's threat lingered like a storm on the horizon. Twice, when Caleb took Eliza and Noah to town for supplies, she noticed hostile stares from people who'd previously been neutral or friendly. The rumor mill was working, she realized. Macklin was spreading his poison, turning their situation into something ugly in the minds of people who'd never bothered to learn the truth. The third time they went to town, the consequences of those rumors became clear. They were leaving the general store, arms full of supplies, when Sheriff Dalton approached, a portly man in his 50s with a mustache that had gone gray at the edges. "Rowan," he said, his tone official. "Need a word." Caleb set down the bags he was carrying and faced the lawman squarely. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "Been hearing some concerning things about your household, specifically about the propriety of having a young girl living under your roof with no female chaperone present." Eliza felt her face burn with humiliation, but Caleb's expression remained calm. "And what business is it of yours or anyone else's how I run my household, Sheriff? When there's questions about the welfare of minors, it becomes my business." Dalton shifted his weight uncomfortably, clearly not enjoying this conversation, but determined to see it through. Jonas Macklin filed a formal complaint suggesting that Miss Hart might be subject to inappropriate conditions. "Jonas Macklin," Caleb said with deadly precision, "is a bitter man who's angry I outbid him at an auction. His complaint is motivated by spite, not concern for anyone's welfare." "Maybe so, but I still need to investigate. I need to speak with the girl privately, ascertain that she's being treated properly." "Ask her right here," Caleb gestured to Eliza. "She's free to speak her mind. I'm not stopping her." Dalton looked at Eliza with something approaching sympathy. "Miss Hart, are you being treated well at the Rowan Ranch?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was clear and firm. "Mr. Rowan has been nothing but respectful and kind to both my brother and me. We have private rooms, fair wages, and complete freedom to leave if we choose." "You have freedom to leave?" Dalton's eyebrows rose. "I was under the impression you were under indenture contract." "The contracts were burned," Caleb said, 2 weeks ago. I have witnesses. My hired hands were present when I destroyed the documents." Dalton looked taken aback. "You burned legal contracts worth $200? "I did, because I didn't buy Eliza and Noah to own them. I bought them to protect them from men who would have abused them. Once they were safe, the contracts were meaningless." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, clearly trying to reconcile this information with whatever Macklin had told him. "And you, Miss Hart, you're staying at the ranch voluntarily?" "Yes, sir, completely voluntarily. Mr. Rowan treats me and my brother better than we've been treated anywhere else. Anyone suggesting otherwise is lying." Dalton sighed and removed his hat, rubbing his forehead. "Well, that's clear enough, I suppose. But you understand my position, miss." I had to ask. "I understand that Jonas Macklin is a liar trying to cause trouble for good people," Eliza said, her voice sharp with anger she usually kept controlled. "And I understand that you're letting him use you to do it." "Eliza," Caleb said quietly, but there was approval in his tone. The sheriff's face reddened. "Now see here." "No, you see here." Eliza stepped forward, her fear burned away by righteous fury. "You want to know about inappropriate conduct? Ask around town about Jonas Macklin. Ask about the women who've worked at his ranch and why none of them stay long. Ask about the complaints that get buried because he has money and influence. Then ask yourself why you're investigating the man who saved me and my brother instead of the man who would have destroyed us." She stopped, slightly shocked by her own outburst. Beside her, she could sense Caleb's surprise, but also his quiet pride. Behind them, Noah had emerged from the store and was watching with wide eyes. Dalton looked profoundly uncomfortable now. I'll take your statements under consideration, but Macklin is within his rights to file complaints, and we're within our rights to live our lives without harassment, Caleb interrupted. If Macklin files more complaints, you tell him to come speak to me directly instead of hiding behind the law, because I'm done being polite about this. The sheriff nodded stiffly, replaced his hat, and retreated back toward his office with the air of a man who regretted getting involved. As soon as he was out of earshot, Caleb turned to Eliza with a mixture of concern and admiration. "That was brave," he said, "and possibly reckless. You just made an enemy of the sheriff." "I made an enemy of the truth being ignored," Eliza shot back, her heart still pounding. "I'm tired of men like Macklin getting away with lies while people like you get punished for doing the right thing." Something fierce and warm blazed in Caleb's eyes. "Still, you didn't have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did." Eliza met his gaze steadily. "You defended us when we had no one. The least I can do is speak up when someone tries to tear you down with lies." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Then Noah tugged on Caleb's sleeve, breaking the tension. "Caleb? Are we in trouble?" "No, son." Caleb ruffled his hair gently. "We're not in trouble. Just dealing with some people who don't understand how things work. Come on, let's get these supplies loaded and head home." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But as they crested the final hill and the ranch buildings came into view below, Eliza felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of belonging. This was home. These people were her family, and she would fight to protect them just as fiercely as they'd fought to protect her. Whatever Jonas Macklin tried next, he was going to find that Eliza Hart was no longer the frightened girl standing on an auction platform. She was someone who'd found her strength, her voice, and her place in the world, and she wasn't going to give any of it up without a fight. Winter arrived in earnest the week after their confrontation with Sheriff Dalton, bringing with it snow that transformed the ranch into something from a storybook. Eliza watched from the kitchen window as Noah helped Jack build a snowman in the yard, their laughter carrying clear and bright through the cold air. The boy who'd stood trembling on an auction platform 3 months ago now threw snowballs with abandon, his cheeks red from cold and joy. The change in him was miraculous, but the change in herself was perhaps even more profound. Eliza had stopped counting exits. She'd stopped positioning herself between Noah and potential threats because the threats had evaporated, replaced by routine and safety and something that felt dangerously close to happiness. She was kneading bread dough when Caleb came in through the back door, stamping snow from his boots. His face was wind-burned and his hair dusted with white, but his eyes found her immediately, as they always seem to these days. "It's coming down hard out there," he said, moving to the stove to warm his hands. "We might be snowed in for a few days if this keeps up." "The pantry's well stocked. We'll manage." Eliza shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. "Did you check on the cattle?" "Miguel and I brought them closer to the barn. They've got shelter and hay enough for a week." He watched her work for a moment, and she was acutely aware of his attention. "You've gotten good at this. The bread, I mean, better than it was even a month ago." "Practice." She kept her eyes on the dough, uncertain how to handle the warmth in his voice. "And I found your mother's recipe book in the pantry. The notes she left were helpful." "My mother?" Caleb looked confused. "The previous owner's wife, I mean. There was a small notebook tucked behind the flour bin with bread recipes and cooking times for the stove. I assumed—" "Right, Mrs. Fletcher." Caleb's expression had gone distant. "She died before they sold the place. Her husband couldn't bear to stay after. I should have cleaned out all her things, but some of them felt too personal to just throw away." Eliza set the loaves aside to rise and wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up difficult memories." "You didn't." He shook his head. "Actually, I think she'd be happy knowing someone was using her recipes. She loved this kitchen, spent more time here than anywhere else in the house, according to the neighbors." The moment felt strangely intimate, standing together in the warm kitchen while snow fell outside and bread rose under clean towels. Eliza found herself noticing details she usually tried to ignore. The way Caleb's hair curled slightly when it was wet with snow, the small scar on his jaw she'd never asked about, the gentle strength in his hands as he poured himself coffee. Eliza, his voice was soft, tentative. Can I ask you something? Her heart kicked up its pace. Of course. Are you happy here? Truly happy, not just safe or comfortable, but actually happy? The question caught her off guard with its directness. She turned to face him fully, studying his expression. He looked vulnerable in a way she rarely saw, as if her answer carried weight beyond simple curiosity. Yes, she said honestly. I am. I didn't expect to be. I didn't think I could be after everything, but I wake up every morning and I'm not afraid. That's more than I ever thought I'd have. Something in Caleb's face softened. Good. That's good. He seemed to wrestle with words, opening his mouth and closing it again before finally continuing. Because I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to think it changes anything or puts any pressure on you to feel a certain way. Eliza's stomach fluttered with an emotion she didn't want to name. What is it? I care about you. The words came out rushed, as if he'd been holding them back for too long. Not as a ward or an employee or even just a friend. I care about you as a woman I've come to admire and respect, and... He stopped, running a hand through his damp hair in frustration. I'm making a mess of this. No, Eliza's voice was barely above a whisper. You're not. I know the circumstances of how you came here were complicated. I know I was the one who bought your contract, even if I burned it later. I know there's a power imbalance that makes this inappropriate to even discuss, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. And what I feel is, Caleb. She stopped him before he could finish, her heart hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. I need to tell you something too. He waited, his blue-gray eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her skin warm. I was terrified of you, Eliza said. That first day, when you made your bid, I was convinced you were just better at hiding your cruelty than Jonas Macklin. I thought you'd wait until we were isolated at the ranch and then show your true colors. I know. His voice was rough. I could see it in your eyes every time I came near you. But you never gave me a reason to be afraid. Not once. You kept every promise. You treated us with dignity and kindness even when you didn't have to. You made Noah laugh again. You made me feel like a person instead of property. Her throat tightened with emotion. And somewhere along the way I stopped being afraid and started being something else. What's something else? Caleb took a step closer, and she didn't retreat. I don't know what to call it. Grateful doesn't seem like enough. Neither does safe or comfortable or any of the other words I've been using to describe how I feel here. She forced herself to look directly at him. All I know is that when you're gone for the day, I listen for your horse. When you come in from the cold, I want to make sure you're warm and fed. When that man said those terrible things about you, I wanted to defend you so badly it felt like a physical need. Eliza, let me finish. She needed to get this out before her courage failed. I'm 19 years old. I've been responsible for my brother since I was 9. I've never had time to think about things like this, about feelings that aren't tied to survival or duty. But lately I've been thinking about them anyway. About you. The kitchen seemed to shrink around them, the space between their bodies suddenly charged with possibility. Caleb's hand rose slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, and came to rest gently on her cheek. I don't want to take advantage, he said quietly. I don't want you to feel obligated because I helped you. This has to be real, Eliza. It has to be choice, not gratitude or debt. It is real. She leaned into his touch without thinking. I choose this. I choose you. The kiss happened slowly, tentatively, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. His lips were warm despite the cold he'd brought in from outside, and gentle in a way that made her chest ache. It wasn't passionate or desperate. It was careful, reverent, a question being asked and answered without words. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his breath coming slightly unsteady. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. Only weeks? Eliza managed a shaky laugh. I've been thinking about it for longer than I want to admit. They stood together in the warmth of the kitchen, snow falling outside the window, bread rising on the counter, and something new and fragile growing between them. It felt right in a way Eliza had never experienced before. Not forced or hurried or transactional, but natural as breathing. A crash from outside followed by Noah's delighted shriek broke the moment. They separated reluctantly, both smiling, and Caleb moved to the window to check on the source of the noise. Jack just dumped an entire armload of snow on Miguel's head, he reported, and Miguel is plotting revenge. This could get ugly. Should we intervene? Probably. But he didn't move, and neither did she. They stood side by side at the window, watching the three people who'd become family engage in an impromptu snow battle, and Eliza felt something settle in her chest that she'd been missing her entire life. This was what home felt like. Not just safety or shelter, but belonging, connection, love freely given and received. The moment couldn't last forever. Eventually, Caleb had to return to his work, and Eliza had bread to bake and dinner to prepare. But something fundamental had shifted between them, and she could see it reflected in the small smiles they exchanged across the dinner table that evening, in the way he made sure to sit closer to her than strictly necessary, in the gentle brush of his hand against hers as they both reached for the same serving dish. Miguel noticed, of course. His sharp eyes missed nothing, but when he caught Eliza's gaze, he simply nodded once. Approval or acknowledgement, she wasn't sure which. Jack seemed oblivious, too busy entertaining Noah with stories about his childhood adventures, but his easy acceptance of whatever was developing created its own kind of safety. That night, after Noah was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Eliza found herself restless. She pulled on her shawl and ventured downstairs, drawn by lamplight coming from Caleb's office. He looked up from the ledgers spread across his desk as she appeared in the doorway. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too much on my mind." She hesitated at the threshold, suddenly uncertain of the protocol for this new territory they'd entered. "Can I come in?" "Always." He pushed back from the desk and gestured to the worn leather chair opposite his. "I'm just doing the monthly accounts, riveting stuff." Eliza settled into the chair, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill that always seemed to linger in corners the fire couldn't reach. "Is the ranch doing well? Financially, I mean?" "Well enough. We'll turn a profit this year, which is more than I could say for the first few years I owned the place." He leaned back, studying her. "Why do you ask?" "Because I want to understand this place. I want to know what keeps it running, what threatens it, what makes it work." She met his eyes directly. "If I'm going to stay, if we're going to be whatever we're becoming, I should understand the reality of it, not just the comfort." Caleb's expression shifted to something that looked like respect mixed with affection. "The reality is that ranching is hard work with uncertain rewards. Weather can destroy a year's profit in a single storm. Disease can wipe out livestock. Markets fluctuate based on factors we can't control. But if you're smart and careful and willing to work hard, you can make a life out of it. And you've been smart and careful." "I've tried to be. Not always successfully." He gestured to the ledgers. "I've made mistakes, lost money on bad investments, trusted the wrong people, pushed too hard when I should have been patient. But I've learned from each failure, and the ranch is stronger for it." "Tell me about the worst mistake," Eliza said. "The one that almost broke you." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Then he sighed and pulled one of the ledgers toward him, flipping back several pages to a section marked with different colored ink. 3 years ago, I took out a loan to expand the herd. The banker convinced me it was a smart investment. Buy more cattle, graze them through the season, sell them in the fall for twice what I paid. Simple mathematics." His jaw tightened. What he didn't mention was that he'd convinced 5 other ranchers to do the same thing. When fall came, the market was flooded. Prices crashed. I sold at a loss. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I almost lost the ranch. I had to let go of 2 hired hands I couldn't afford to keep. I sold off equipment, tightened the belt on everything, worked 18-hour days just to keep afloat." He looked at her directly. "Miguel stayed even though I couldn't pay him properly for 6 months. Jack stayed when he could have found better wages elsewhere. They saved this place as much as I did." "But you recovered." "Eventually. It took 2 years of careful management and a lot of luck with the weather. By the time you and Noah arrived, I was finally back on solid ground." He paused. "Which is why I could afford to buy your contracts. I'd been saving that money for another expansion, but when I saw you on that platform, the expansion didn't seem important anymore. The admission hung between them, heavy with significance. He'd chosen them over his business goals. He'd sacrificed growth and security to save two children he'd never met. Why? Eliza asked, the question that had driven so much of their relationship. Why us specifically? There must have been other children sold that day, other people in desperate situations. What made you choose us? Caleb stood and moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered yard barely visible in the darkness. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear. You didn't beg, he said. Everyone else on that platform, the other children, the desperate adults, they all begged or pleaded or tried to make themselves seem valuable. But you just stood there, holding Noah's hand, looking at that crowd like you were daring them to break you. You were terrified, I could see it, but you refused to show it. You had this dignity, this strength that shouldn't have existed in someone so young who'd lost so much. He turned back to face her. And I thought about Sarah, about how she'd tried to be strong too, how she'd never complained even when the work was killing her. And I thought about what might have happened to her if someone had seen that strength and protected it instead of exploiting it. So I chose you because you reminded me of what I'd lost, and I wanted to save you the way no one saved her. Tears burned in Eliza's eyes. That's a heavy burden to carry, being someone's redemption. You're not a burden. You never were. Caleb crossed back to her, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. Maybe you started as a way to make peace with the past, but that's not what you are now. Now you're just Eliza, the woman who makes my house feel like a home, the person I look for when I come in from the cold, the one I want to talk to when something good happens or something goes wrong. Caleb. His name came out broken, and she reached out to touch his face, feeling the roughness of his end-of-day stubble against her palm. I don't know how to do this. I've never had this before. Neither have I, not really. He covered her hand with his. We'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. Just us taking it one day at a time. It was the right thing to say, the only thing that could have eased the knot of anxiety in her chest. Eliza leaned forward and kissed him again, less tentative this time, allowing herself to feel the full weight of her emotions without fear or reservation. When they finally said goodnight and retreated to their separate rooms, Eliza lay awake for a long time, replaying the evening in her mind. The kiss, the confession, the gentle promise of a future they'd build together. It felt impossible and inevitable all at once. She must have eventually slept because she woke to Noah shaking her shoulder urgently. Eliza! Eliza, wake up! She sat up, instantly alert. Dawn light was just beginning to filter through the curtains. What's wrong? There's men outside, lots of them. Caleb said to wake you and get you downstairs right away. Her heart dropped. She threw on her dress over her nightgown, not bothering with all the fastenings, and followed Noah downstairs. Through the sitting room window, she could see what had alarmed him. At least a dozen riders spread out in front of the house, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold morning air. And at their center, looking triumphant, sat Jonas Macklin. Caleb stood on the porch, rifle in hand, with Miguel and Jack flanking him. The sight was grimly familiar, a repeat of Macklin's first visit, but with significantly more force behind it. Stay inside, Caleb said without turning around. Keep Noah away from the windows. Eliza guided her brother to the kitchen, furthest from the confrontation, but she positioned herself where she could still hear through the open doorway. Quite the welcoming party, Macklin, Caleb's voice carried clearly. What brings you and your private army to my land this early in the morning? Justice. Macklin's voice was smug. I've got a warrant here signed by Judge Morrison. Seems there's been complaints about the welfare of minors in your household. The court's appointed me as temporary guardian until a proper investigation can be conducted. That's the biggest load of horse shit I've ever heard. Jack's anger was palpable. You can't just... I can, and I will. Papers rustled. It's all legal and proper. The girl and boy come with me now, and you can argue about it with the judge later. Eliza's blood ran cold. This was Macklin's play. Use his influence to manufacture a legal justification for taking them. And once he had them in his custody, There was no telling what would happen before any investigation could take place. She looked down at Noah, who was staring up at her with wide, terrified eyes, and made a decision. She wasn't going to hide in the kitchen while men decided her fate. She'd done that once before on an auction platform, and she'd sworn never to be that powerless again. "Stay here," she told Noah firmly. "Don't come out no matter what you hear." "Eliza, no." But she was already moving, striding through the sitting room and out onto the porch before Caleb could stop her. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She'd forgotten to grab her shawl, but she ignored it, focusing instead on Macklin's surprised face. "Let me see that warrant," she demanded. "This doesn't concern you, girl. It absolutely concerns me, since I'm apparently the subject of it." She held out her hand. "Let me see the document." Macklin exchanged glances with his men, clearly not having expected resistance. Slowly, he pulled a folded paper from his coat and tossed it toward the porch. It landed in the snow at the bottom of the steps. Miguel moved to retrieve it, but Eliza was faster. She snatched it up, shaking off the snow, and scanned the contents with the literacy her father had insisted she develop. The legal language was dense, but the meaning was clear enough. Judge Morrison had indeed signed an order placing her and Noah under temporary guardianship pending investigation of their living conditions. But there was something wrong with it. The signature looked rushed, the seal was slightly off-center, and the date. "This is dated 3 days ago," Eliza said, her voice cutting through the morning air. "Judge Morrison has been in Denver for a week attending a territorial conference. I know because Mrs. Fletcher at the boarding house mentioned it when we were in town. So either this document is a forgery or the judge signed it before he left, which would mean you've been sitting on a legal order for days instead of executing it immediately as required by law." The silence that followed was profound. Macklin's face went through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple that suggested apoplectic rage. "You calling me a liar?" he snarled. "I'm calling this document suspicious." Eliza's hands were shaking, but her voice remained steady. "And I'm saying that if you try to take me or my brother by force based on questionable legal authority, you'll be guilty of kidnapping, which last I checked was a hanging offense in this territory." "Listen here, you little—" "No, you listen." Caleb's voice was like thunder, silencing Macklin mid-sentence. "That girl has more courage and integrity in her little finger than you have in your whole miserable body. You want to take her? You're going to have to go through me, and Miguel, and Jack, and anyone else on this ranch who knows the difference between law and bullying." Miguel had moved to Caleb's left, his rifle now clearly visible. Jack had produced a shotgun from somewhere and stood ready on the right. The three of them formed an impenetrable wall between Macklin's men and the house. "This ain't over, Rowan," Macklin spat. "I've got friends—" "Your friends won't help you when word gets out that you tried to kidnap children using a forged court order," Caleb interrupted. "Because that's what we'll tell everyone. That's what we'll testify to if this goes to trial. And I guarantee you we've got better standing in this community than a man known for mistreating his workers." "You've got no proof it's forged." "Then you won't mind riding with us to town so we can send a telegram to Denver and verify the judge's signature." Caleb's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Unless you'd prefer to leave now and forget this ever happened." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the cold air like electricity before a lightning strike. Macklin's men were shifting nervously, clearly not having signed on for a potential gunfight, and their uncertainty was palpable. Finally, Macklin jerked his horse's reins viciously. "This ain't over," he repeated. "You haven't heard the last of this." "I'm sure I haven't," Caleb agreed, "but you're still leaving my property. Now." The riders wheeled their horses and thundered back down the road, leaving churned snow and the echo of hoofbeats in their wake. As soon as they were out of sight, Eliza's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the porch steps, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaking. Caleb was beside her immediately, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. "That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, only concern and admiration. "I couldn't just hide," Eliza whispered. "Not again. Not when it's my life being decided." "I know." He pulled her against his side and she let herself lean into his warmth. "You were magnificent. The way you dissected that warrant, the way you stood up to him. Eliza, you were magnificent." Miguel approached, still holding the suspicious document. The girl is right. This signature is wrong. I have seen the judge's writing before. This is not it. So Macklin tried to kidnap them using a forged court order. Jack's voice was grim. That's got to be illegal in about 6 different ways. It is, and we're going to make sure everyone knows it. Caleb stood, helping Eliza to her feet. We're riding to town today. All of us. We're going to the sheriff, we're going to the telegraph office, and we're going to make sure Macklin's little scheme gets exposed for what it is. But even as they made plans, even as the immediate danger receded, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Macklin had been humiliated twice now, and men like him didn't accept humiliation gracefully. He would try again, and next time he might be smarter about it. She looked at Caleb, at Miguel and Jack, at the house that had become home, and felt fierce determination settle in her chest. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And this time, she wouldn't be a passive victim waiting to be saved. This time, she would fight. The ride to town was tense despite the bright winter sunshine that made the snow-covered landscape sparkle like scattered diamonds. Caleb drove the wagon with Eliza beside him while Miguel and Jack rode alongside on horseback, their rifles prominently displayed. Noah sat in the back, wrapped in blankets and unusually quiet, sensing the gravity of what had transpired that morning. "You're sure about this?" Eliza asked quietly as the town came into view. Confronting Macklin publicly could make things worse. "It could," Caleb admitted. "But hiding won't make him go away. The only way to stop a man like that is to expose him for what he is." He glanced at her, his expression serious but tender. "I won't let him take you, either of you, whatever it costs me." The weight of that promise settled over Eliza like a warm cloak. She reached over and placed her hand on his, a simple gesture that felt more significant than any words could be. Their first stop was the telegraph office, where Caleb composed a carefully worded message to Judge Morrison in Denver, asking him to verify whether he'd signed a guardianship order regarding Eliza and Noah Hart. The telegraph operator, a thin man named Hobbs with wire-rimmed spectacles, read the message with growing interest. "Judge Morrison, you say? He won't be back for another 3 days at least. Might take a while to get a response." "That's fine. Just make sure it gets sent right away." Caleb paid for the telegram and added extra to ensure priority handling. "And Hobbs? I'd appreciate discretion about this." Hobbs adjusted his spectacles, his eyes sharp with understanding. "Wouldn't dream of gossiping, Mr. Rowan, though I suspect the whole town will know soon enough anyway. Word travels fast around here." He wasn't wrong. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the unusual sight of the Rowan household arriving en masse. Eliza could feel their stares, hear the whispered speculation, and she lifted her chin defiantly. Let them look. Let them wonder. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Sheriff Dalton looked distinctly unhappy to see them, his face already settling into lines of weary resignation as they entered his office. "Rowan, I suppose this is about Macklin's visit to your ranch this morning?" "Word really does travel fast," Caleb said dryly. "Yes, it's about that. And about the forged court document he tried to use to kidnap Eliza and Noah." "Forged?" Dalton's eyebrows shot up. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious crime." Caleb produced the warrant and laid it on the sheriff's desk. "Look at the signature. Look at the date. Judge Morrison has been in Denver for a week, yet this is dated 3 days ago. Either Macklin has the ability to make the judge sign documents from 200 miles away, or this is a forgery." Dalton examined this document carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each passing moment. "This does look irregular. The seal's not quite right." "We've sent a telegram to the judge asking for verification," Caleb continued. "But in the meantime, I want it on record that Jonas Macklin attempted to remove 2 members of my household by force using fraudulent legal documents. That's kidnapping, Sheriff, and it's your job to do something about it." "Now hold on," Dalton began, but Miguel cut him off. "There were 12 witnesses to Macklin's attempt," the former scout said quietly. 12 men who rode with him to the Rowan Ranch. I am certain some of them would be willing to testify about what they were told and what they saw, especially if it means avoiding charges of conspiracy." The sheriff's face went through several expressions before settling on grim acceptance. You're putting me in a difficult position, Rowan. Macklin's got influence, and I've got the truth. Caleb leaned forward, his voice hard. Which do you think will matter more when this gets dragged into court? Because I promise you, if you don't do your job, I'll make sure everyone from here to the territorial capital knows that Sheriff Dalton protected a man who tried to kidnap children. It was a threat, plain and simple, and Dalton clearly recognized it as such. He sighed heavily and pulled out a piece of paper. Fine. I'll file a report and bring Macklin in for questioning once we hear back from the judge. But Rowan, you're making enemies, powerful ones. I've survived worse enemies than Jonas Macklin. Caleb straightened, his hand finding Eliza's shoulder in a gesture of protection and partnership. We'll be at the general store if you need us. Come on. As they left the sheriff's office, Eliza felt the weight of curious stares following them. The small crowd had grown larger, and she recognized several faces. Mrs. Fletcher from the boarding house, Mr. Hendricks from the general store, and various other townspeople who'd witnessed the auction where she and Noah had been sold. Mrs. Fletcher approached first, her weathered face creased with concern. Miss Eliza, is it true? Did Jonas Macklin try to take you and your brother by force? Before Eliza could answer, Caleb spoke up, his voice pitched to Carrie. It's true. He showed up at my ranch this morning with a dozen men and a forged court document, claiming he had the right to remove Eliza and Noah from my care. When Miss Eliza here had the courage and intelligence to question the document's authenticity, he threatened violence. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Eliza saw several faces darken with disapproval. Macklin might have influence, but attempting to kidnap children was beyond the pale even for those who might otherwise tolerate his behavior. That's outrageous, Mrs. Fletcher declared. I always knew Jonas Macklin was a snake, but this is beyond decency. It's criminal, added a voice from the back of the crowd. Using a fake court order? That's fraud at minimum. The sentiment seemed to ripple through the gathering, voices rising in agreement. Eliza felt Caleb's hand tighten on her shoulder, a silent communication of support, and she found herself standing straighter, no longer trying to hide or minimize her presence. If I may say something, she called out, and the crowd quieted. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced her voice to remain steady. I know some of you probably believe the rumors Mr. Macklin has been spreading about my situation at the Rowan Ranch. I know there's been talk about propriety and questions about whether I'm being treated well. She paused, meeting eyes around the circle. I want to set the record straight. Mr. Rowan bought my brother and me at auction to save us from being separated or sold to someone who would abuse us. He gave us our own rooms, paid us fair wages, treated us with respect and dignity, and then burned our indenture contracts to give us our freedom. We stay at his ranch by choice because it's the best home we've ever known. But there's no woman to chaperone you, someone called out, an older woman Eliza didn't recognize. It's not proper for a young girl to live in a house full of men. Before Eliza could respond, Mrs. Fletcher spoke up sharply. Proper? You want to talk about proper? It's not proper for children to be sold like livestock in the first place. It's not proper for grown men to try to kidnap them using forged documents. And it's certainly not proper for busybodies to judge the living arrangements of people they don't know. Caleb Rowan is a good man who did a good thing. And if you can't see that, the problem is with your vision, not with his character. Several voices rose in agreement, and Eliza felt a swell of gratitude for the unexpected support. Not everyone in the crowd was convinced. She could see skepticism on some faces, disapproval on others, but the tide of public opinion seemed to be turning in their favor. Mr. Hendricks cleared his throat. I've known Caleb Rowan for 6 years since he first bought that ranch. He's always been honest in his dealings, fair with his workers, and respectful to everyone he meets. If he says he's protecting those children, I believe him. So do I, added another man, a rancher Eliza had seen around town. And I know for a fact that Jonas Macklin treats his workers like dirt. Lost 3 good hands last year because they couldn't stand his cruelty. If we're choosing sides here, I know which one I'm on. The crowd began to break up, people clustering in small groups to discuss what they'd heard. Eliza could see the conversation spreading, growing, transforming from whispered rumors into open debate. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was a start. They spent the next hour at the general store, stocking up on supplies and fielding questions from curious customers. Each time someone asked about the situation, Caleb or Eliza calmly explained the facts. The auction, the burned contracts, Macklin's harassment, the forged warrant. By the time they left, Eliza was exhausted but cautiously hopeful. The response to the telegram came 2 days later. Jack rode into town to check with Hobbs and returned with a message that made Caleb smile grimly. Judge Morrison had never signed any guardianship order regarding Eliza or Noah Hart. He considered the forged document a serious crime and had instructed Sheriff Dalton to arrest Jonas Macklin immediately. "It's over," Jack announced as he burst into the kitchen where Eliza was preparing dinner. The judge confirmed it's a forgery. The sheriff's heading out to the Macklin ranch right now. Eliza set down the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables, her hands suddenly shaking. "They're actually going to arrest him?" "That's what Hobbs said. Forgery, attempted kidnapping, fraud. The charges are piling up. Macklin's going to be in serious trouble." Jack's grin was fierce. Couldn't happen to a nicer person. When Caleb came in from the barn an hour later, Eliza met him at the door. Without thinking, without hesitation, she threw her arms around him, holding tight as relief and joy, and a dozen other emotions crashed through her. "We won," she whispered against his chest. "We actually won." His arms came around her, strong and sure, and she felt him press a kiss to the top of her head. "You won. You're the one who caught the forgery. You're the one who stood up to him. All I did was back you up." "You did more than that." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "You gave me the foundation to stand on, the safety to be brave, the knowledge that I wasn't alone." "You're never going to be alone again," Caleb said quietly. "I promise you that." The kiss that followed felt different from the ones before, deeper, more certain, infused with the knowledge that they'd weathered a storm together and come through stronger. When they finally broke apart, Eliza saw Miguel and Jack watching from the barn with knowing smiles, and she felt her face heat with embarrassment. "Guess the secret's out," she muttered. "Was it ever really a secret?" Caleb laughed. "Miguel figured it out weeks ago, and Jack's been making meaningful looks at me since Thanksgiving." "I have not," Jack called out, his grin belying the protest. "I've been very subtle." "As subtle as a charging bull," Miguel agreed solemnly. The teasing continued through dinner, Noah joining in with childish enthusiasm, and Eliza felt something that had been tight in her chest for months finally release. This was family, not bound by blood or legal documents, but by choice and care and the decision to stand together against whatever came. The news of Macklin's arrest spread through the county like wildfire. Within a week, stories began to emerge. Workers who'd been abused at the Macklin Ranch coming forward with their experiences, business partners revealing fraudulent dealings, and most damning of all, 2 of the men who'd ridden with Macklin that morning testifying that he'd told them the document was legitimate and that they were simply helping execute a court order. By the time Macklin's trial was scheduled for early spring, public opinion had turned so thoroughly against him that he sold his ranch and left the territory entirely, forfeiting his bail rather than face judgment. The ranch was bought by a family from Missouri who proved to be fair employers and good neighbors. With Macklin gone and the threat finally, truly eliminated, life at the Rowan Ranch settled into a new rhythm. Winter deepened, bringing snow that sometimes isolated them for days at a time, but isolation felt less like danger and more like cozy security. Eliza taught Noah his letters and numbers by the fire. Miguel told stories of his time as an Army scout. Jack entertained them with increasingly elaborate tales of his childhood misadventures, and Caleb watched over all of them with quiet satisfaction. On Christmas Eve, as they sat around the fire after a feast Eliza had spent 2 days preparing, Caleb stood and cleared his throat awkwardly. "I have something I need to say, or rather, something I need to ask." Eliza looked up from where she'd been helping Noah with a wooden puzzle Jack had carved for him, her heart suddenly racing. "These past few months have been the best of my life," Caleb continued, his eyes fixed on Eliza. "This house was just a building before you came. Now it's a home. You've brought light and laughter and love to a place that was missing all 3. He crossed to where she sat and knelt down, taking her hands in his. "Eliza Hart, I know the circumstances of how we met were complicated. I know there's a history there that some people might say makes this inappropriate, but I also know that I love you. I love your strength, your courage, your kindness. I love the way you protect Noah with such fierce devotion. I love the way you stand up for what's right even when it's terrifying. I love everything about you." Tears were streaming down Eliza's face now, but she was smiling through them. "Caleb, let me finish," he said gently. "I want to marry you, not because it would solve any problems or make anything more proper or respectable. I want to marry you because I can't imagine my life without you in it. Because you're my partner, my equal, my best friend, and the woman I want to build a future with." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band. "Will you marry me?" The room had gone utterly silent. Noah was staring with wide eyes. Miguel and Jack had frozen mid-conversation, both watching with barely concealed delight. Eliza looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who'd saved her from a terrible fate, who'd given her freedom when he could have demanded servitude, who'd stood beside her against threats and danger and public scrutiny, the man who'd taught her that love didn't have to be transactional, that home didn't have to be fragile, that family could be chosen. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Caleb stood and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around while Noah cheered and Jack whistled and Miguel smiled his rare, genuine smile. "When?" Jack asked eagerly. "When's the wedding?" "Spring," Caleb said, looking to Eliza for confirmation. "After the thaw, when we can get the minister out here and maybe have some flowers." "Spring," Eliza agreed, though honestly she would have married him tomorrow if circumstances allowed. They were married in late April, on a day when the meadow flowers were blooming in wild profusion and the mountains still carried their caps of snow. The ceremony was simple, held in the ranch's front yard with the minister from town officiating. Mrs. Fletcher came, along with Mr. Hendricks and several other townspeople who'd become friends over the winter. Miguel stood as Caleb's best man, solemn and proud in his finest clothes. Noah served as ring bearer with endearing seriousness, and Jack spent most of the ceremony trying not to cry and failing spectacularly. Eliza wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric. Caleb had surprised her with cream-colored silk that must have cost him a small fortune, though he'd waved off her protests about the expense. Mrs. Fletcher had helped with the fitting and added delicate lace to the collar and cuffs, transforming the simple design into something beautiful. As she stood beside Caleb and repeated her vows, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the terror of the auction platform to the safety of this ranch, from desperation to hope, from being property to being a bride standing freely beside the man she loved. "I promise to stand beside you in all things," she said when it was her turn to speak. "To build a life with you based on choice and trust. To honor the gift you gave me when you saw me not as something to own but as someone to protect. To love you not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you've shown me what real love looks like." Caleb's eyes were suspiciously bright as he responded with his own vows. "I promise to never take your freedom for granted. To always see you as my equal and partner. To protect you and Noah not because I have to, but because you're my family by choice. To build a home with you where love isn't bought or sold, but given freely." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by the people who'd become their family, not through blood or obligation, but through shared trials and chosen loyalty. The celebration that followed was joyful and chaotic, with too much food, enthusiastic dancing to Jack's fiddle playing, and stories that grew more embellished with each telling. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Eliza found herself standing on the porch with Caleb, watching Noah chase fireflies with the children of their neighbors. "Happy?" Caleb asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible." Eliza leaned into him, marveling at how natural it felt. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I went from being sold on an auction platform to standing here as your wife." "Believe it." He turned her to face him, his expression serious despite the joy of the day. "You're not someone I saved, Eliza. You're someone who saved herself, who took the opportunity I offered and turned it into a real life. You're strong and brave and capable, and you always were. All I did was give you a safe place to show it." "We saved each other," Eliza corrected gently. "You needed family as much as I needed safety. We built this together." As if to prove the point, Noah came running up to the porch, his face flushed with happiness. "Eliza, Caleb, Jack says we can light the bonfire now. Can we, please? Go ahead, Caleb said, ruffling the boy's hair. Just be careful and stay back from the flames. Noah ran off, shouting instructions to Jack about the proper way to arrange kindling, and Eliza laughed at his sudden expertise in fire building. He's happy here, she observed. Really, truly happy. So are you. I can see it. Caleb pulled her closer. And that makes me happy. This, all of this, is what I wanted when I bought this ranch. A place where people could heal and grow and become who they were meant to be. Mission accomplished, Eliza said softly. The seasons turned, as they always did. Spring gave way to summer, summer to fall, fall to winter. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Caleb handling the livestock and land, Eliza managing the household accounts, and gradually taking over more of the business negotiations as her natural aptitude for numbers became apparent. Noah grew like a weed, shooting up several inches and losing the last vestiges of the frightened child who'd clung to Eliza's skirts. He learned to ride, to rope cattle, to handle responsibility with the guidance of 3 men who treated him like the son or younger brother none of them had. By the following spring, when the meadow flowers bloomed again, Eliza had news that would change everything once more. She waited until after dinner, when they were all gathered in the sitting room, before making her announcement. I have something to tell you, she said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. We're going to need to make some changes to the house. Specifically, we're going to need to convert one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery. The silence lasted exactly 3 heartbeats before comprehension dawned. Caleb's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, joy, wonder, and finally a kind of awed delight that made Eliza's heart swell. We're... He couldn't seem to finish the sentence. We're going to have a baby, Eliza confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. Around October, the doctor thinks. Noah leaped up with a shout of excitement. I'm going to be a big brother. I can teach the baby everything. Can I, Eliza? Can I help take care of it? Of course you can, sweetheart. The baby will be lucky to have you. Jack let out a whoop and immediately started planning improvements to the house. Miguel smiled his quiet smile and offered congratulations in Spanish that sounded like poetry. And Caleb crossed the room to pull Eliza into his arms, holding her with such careful tenderness that she had to blink back tears. Thank you, he whispered against her hair. Thank you for this, for everything, for choosing this life with me. Thank you for making it possible, she whispered back. The baby arrived in late October, a healthy girl with dark hair and her father's storm gray eyes. They named her Sarah, for the sister Caleb had lost, and Anne, for Eliza's mother. From the moment she entered the world, Sarah Rowan was surrounded by love. Her parents, her brother Noah, who took his responsibilities with endearing seriousness, and her honorary uncles Miguel and Jack, who competed to see who could spoil her more thoroughly. As Eliza sat in the rocking chair by the nursery window one evening, nursing her daughter while watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, she thought about the path that had led her here. The loss and fear and desperation, the auction platform where she'd stood holding Noah's hand and praying for mercy, the quiet cowboy who'd outbid Jonas Macklin and changed everything. She thought about the contracts burning in the fireplace, about standing up to Macklin's threats, about learning to trust that safety and love could be real and lasting. She thought about vows exchanged freely, about family built by choice, about a home that was truly hers. What are you thinking about? Caleb asked softly from the doorway. About how far we've come, Eliza said. About how that day on the auction platform felt like the end of everything, but it was actually the beginning. He came to sit beside her, his hand gentle on Sarah's downy head. The beginning of us. The beginning of family, Eliza agreed. Not bought or sold or forced, just chosen. Chosen, Caleb repeated and kissed her temple. The best things always are. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first of the season dusting the ranch in white. But inside, the house was warm with firelight and love, with the soft sounds of a baby nursing and the distant murmur of voices from downstairs where Noah was helping Jack and Miguel prepare dinner. This was what home felt like, Eliza thought. Not a place or a building, but the people who filled it with love and chose each other every single day. She'd been sold with her brother, terrified and desperate, and a cowboy had said they were his family now. He'd kept that promise. They all had. All. And in the keeping of it, they'd created something beautiful. A family bound not by obligation or ownership, but by the simple, powerful choice to love and be loved in return. It was more than Eliza had ever dared to hope for standing on that auction platform. It was more than she dreamed possible in those early days of watching for exits and counting the ways she might need to protect Noah. It was everything. And as Sarah's eyes drifted closed in milk-drunk contentment, as Caleb's arm came around her shoulders, as the sounds of her chosen family drifted up from below, Eliza Hart Rowan smiled and held tight to the life they'd built together, the life she'd fought for, chosen, and would protect with everything she had. Because family wasn't claimed or sold or forced. It was built, day by day, by those who chose each other and never let go. And they never would.